Tuesday, December 8th, 2015. And our next item of business is item 12A, which is the third reading and continued public hearing for ordinance number PA 1315 in the matter of co-adopting the Coburg Urbanization Study Update, expanding the urban growth boundary for industrial and residential land needs, to redesignate land from traditional residential, rural residential, and agricultural to medium and high-density residential, light industrial, and mixed-use plan designations, adopting corresponding amendments to the official Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan, and adopting savings and severability clauses, file number 509 PA 1405404. So this is a decision of the board subject to establishing findings of fact showing compliance with the applicable comp plan policies and lane code criteria cited in the staff report. Evidence and testimony must be directed towards the approval criteria. Testimony not directed towards the approval criteria may be irrelevant to this land use proceeding. Individuals wishing to address the board must first be recognized by the chair and state their name and full residence for the record. So I'm going to ask at this time if any of the board members would like to disclose any ex parte contacts or abstentions due to conflicts of interest, if any. Commissioner Stewart.
Mr. Chair, I just disclosed that a couple of days after our previous meeting on this, I met with Mia Nelson, and also yesterday I took a telephone call from Mr. Lee, Steve Lee.
Any other ex parte contacts?
No.
And I'd like to note for the record that I also met with Mia Nelson last week? Maybe it was 2 weeks ago. But I don't think it'll have any influence on the final decision in this matter. Is there anyone that wishes to challenge the impartiality of a board member at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on. So this is an opportunity for those present to enter information in the record, verbal or written. Written materials related to the application need to be submitted prior to the close of the record, which we haven't done yet. And failure to raise an issue to enable a response may preclude your ability to appeal. Only individuals or entities that have appeared at some stage in the proceedings may appeal this decision of the board to the Land Use Board of Appeals. So with that, I will turn to our staff for the presentation before we open the public hearing. So, Lindsay.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. As you stated, in reading of the title, this is the third reading of this ordinance and the continued public hearing. The last meeting was held on November 3rd, and during that public hearing, testimony raised concerns regarding the proposed residential expansion onto farmland rather than exception land, and the justification of bringing in 100 acres of farmland for industrial land. Those were kind of the two big issues that were raised. At the board's request, staff worked with legal counsel to get summaries of the cases that were mentioned during public comment and in the written testimony. The 4 cases that were brought up have been outlined in my agenda cover memo. They were Court of Appeals case. We refer to it as the McMinnville case. There's a LUBA decision known as Donald, which is technically called Friends of French Prairie versus Marion County. There is another Court of Appeals decision known as the Woodburn decision, Thousand Friends versus LCDC, and the fourth, which is a newer decision, was the Court of Appeals decision known as Scappoose, Zimmerman versus LCDC. I'm not going to get into the details during my presentation today, but if you have any specific questions on those summaries, Stephen and I are more than happy to answer questions on those cases. Additional information was provided by the city since our last public hearing in the form of supplemental findings that they actually took to their city council. Their city council adopted those by motion, and a memo from the city attorney. Those two documents have been attached to the county's findings as addendums. A letter was also submitted by Dan Terrell regarding the employment lands, and that document was also attached as an addendum to the county findings after review with legal counsel. There was also some email correspondence that's gone on since the last public hearing, mainly between Thousand Friends and the city attorney have weighed in on some comments. Those that are in your packet as attachment. Although it's listed in my agenda cover memo as attachment 2G, the document itself, there's a typo and it says 3G. It's not that big of a deal, but I thought I'd bring it up if you're trying to look through it in your PDF document. And then the city's email responses are in attachment 3. Staff and legal counsel have met together both with a representative, Mia from Thousand Friends of Oregon, as well as Milo from the city to discuss concerns. And I believe you'll hear testimony from both of them today about those concerns. Staff's recommendation is still in support of this proposal, and our recommendation is for approval of ordinance PA 1315. And at this point, I'd like to conclude my presentation and let the city address additional concerns that were raised at the last public hearing.
Any questions for staff before we go to the public hearing? Seeing none, then I will reopen the public hearing, and I'll call the city, the applicant, to testify first. Milo, are you? And you're not on a timer.
Sorry, what?
You're not on a timer.
Oh, thank you. With the commission's permission, I'd like to have Council President Ray Smith address the commissioners first.
Good afternoon, commissioners. I'm here representing the mayor and myself. I'm here representing the mayor and myself.
Yeah, so come.
Can you hear me now?
They're very directional.
I'm here representing the City of Coburg mayor and myself. I'm the president of the council in the City of Coburg. I'd like to summarize our basis for support of the Coburg UGB expansion. I've been a resident of the City of Coburg for nearly 30 years. I've raised my children in Coburg, and now my grandchildren are a part of the Coburg community. I have served as the chair of the Planning Commission, Budget Committee member, fire chief. I've been an EMT, volunteer firefighter responder for the Coburg Rural Fire Department. I also served as the second grade room mother for the Coburg Elementary School. Coburg's been a big part of my life, obviously. This proposal was developed by the community of Coburg. I'd like to define the Coburg community. This is not just residents within the city limits. It is business owners and operators, the neighbors, friends, and yes, family that live outside of our city but are very much a part of our community. I participated in the early stages of this project as a citizen and with concern as a former Planning Commission member. Hundreds of hours of staff and volunteer time have been committed to this plan. I can attest to the significant input from our community, an impressive showing of city residents, business owners, and surrounding residents. They actively participated in open meetings and discussions about how these decisions would affect our small community. The community participation in this project, in my opinion, has not been equaled by any event that I have seen in Coburg in the 30 years I've been here. This participation showed our planners what the community wants. They want to remain as a small, compact, walkable city. This is ideal for our business development and revitalization of our historic downtown. Coburg also needs residential lands that can be readily and immediately developed. Few, if any, of the Stallings Lane parcels will likely be available for annexation within the next decade. And this is from the mouths of the Stallings Lane residents during these meetings. One public safety issue that concerns our city is the single-point access issue of West Van Dynes between the police station and the fire station. Any disruption on this street isolates the Coburg Community Charter School from police services and most of Coburg and I-5 from EMS and fire suppression services. This creates a real risky situation and has existed for decades. It is a big concern. This proposal will enable the development of a new east-west connector to alleviate this vulnerability. This connector is already in the Coburg TSP. In regards to regional business development, most of those who work in the Coburg industrial areas don't live in Coburg. Those are regional assets. The same will be true for the proposed East Side Industrial Park. This park is less than 10% of the region's industrial land needs. Most importantly, demand is already present, and the park could be contributing almost immediately to the region's economy, unlike proposals currently in discussion in Eugene and Springfield. Elected and appointed officials and the staff of the City of Coburg have dedicated hundreds of hours and tens of thousands of dollars to this proposal. Coburg is seeking a balance between community goals, sound planning practices, and the incorporation of exception lands. We have debated and reasoned through the years, yes, many years, to come up with this proposal. With all of the resources I have described, I and Mayor Pudwell, in his absence, can stand before this body and state that we have a good plan. It is a good plan because our citizens gave us tremendous input as to what our businesses, residents, and neighbors wanted. And we have solid justification for our decisions made through the state-mandated process. No plan of this magnitude is perfect, but this plan is strong and supported by solid facts, and most importantly, is supported by our community. Our council and our citizens proudly present this plan to you for your consideration of approval. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members of the commission, as the staff has said, you have in your materials some additional supplemental findings from the City of Coburg. The council was kept aware of questions.
Milo, if you wouldn't mind, the mic on your left's the one that's live. If you want to turn it down towards your mouth a little there.
Okay,
thanks.
thank you. All right, sorry. The council was aware of the process. They felt that what they could do most appropriately was to adopt some additional findings to address some of the questions you had last time. I'm not going to make specific reference to those in my discussions today. I trust that you've read them and absorbed them. If you have questions about them, I'll be happy to answer that. I also submitted a letter to the chair for the Commission's consideration that goes through a legal analysis of what the process is required to be, and pointed to evidence in the record showing where the City of Coburg has closely followed the legal requirements. So again, I'll be happy to answer any questions about that if you wish. But what I thought I would do is present you with kind of a visual overview of the issues that we have that Coburg wrestled with that resulted in the current presentation. And so I prepared a PowerPoint presentation to give you that visual. You have copies of the slides that were distributed by staff just before you came in, so you can follow along and make notes. And again, if you have questions, please let me know. Can I have the next slide, please? Just a down arrow will do. No. Oh, there we go. Yes. Okay. Basically, I want to talk about 5 things briefly on the criteria, focus on the need, and especially the job need, because there were the most questions about that before. Then talk about the process that Coburg went through to look at the possible areas for expansion of the urban growth boundary. And talk about why they selected what they did by looking at the factors that affect availability, and then talk just briefly again about the final selections. Next slide, please. Okay. I'll try and build that into my... basically, the criteria for compliance with the statutes, there's been a lot of discussion, and I talked about in the letter that I sent to Commissioner Bozovich, that you need to comply with the statutes. The most important statute in this case is ORS 197-298. And there's several provisions in there. That's the one that sets up priorities for including exceptions land, and then low-value farmland, and higher value farmland is a lower priority. We'll be referring to that a little bit, and I refer to it again a lot more in my letter. Need to comply with the goals, especially goal 14 is the one that counts, but other goals play a role. And I want to emphasize that the decision that you make, the decision that the City of Coburg made, was based on evidence in the record. The standard is substantial evidence in the record that that the city or you make a reference to. There's been some discussion about hypotheticals, what if, and those kinds of things. The City of Coburg wasn't able to deal with those hypotheticals. They had to deal with the reality of what was in the record. So questions about rezoning and those kinds of things were dealt with in the record, and that's what Coburg based its decision on. So looking at...
I don't know why this isn't working, sorry.
It's okay. The next slide focuses on the question of residential need. Okay. Well, friends don't let friends use PowerPoint.
So you brought copies, right?
Okay. Yes, I brought copies.
And follow
So
along.
I will tell you, next page, where it says Coburg's residential need. What the process that Coburg went through was to look at its share of the county's population, the coordinated projection, and then looking at, after planning for internal uses, subtracting some things, which I'll show you in just a second. The decision that Coburg came up with is that it needed 99.3 acres of additional residential land and 49.2 of infrastructure land, which is streets and parks, in order to support that additional residential land. So on the next page is a table which is taken from the Coburg study and included into the material in your packet. This is from table A14, if you care. It shows the analysis that Coburg went through, looking at the total residential buildable acres that were available, the needed housing acres, and then the column to the right, the total new needed acres. That's the process where Coburg took the information on what was available and what they needed, and they came up with a final discussion about what additional land needed to be brought into the urban growth boundary. I want to emphasize in there, you'll see some negative numbers in that right-hand column. That's because Coburg did what it is supposed to do under the law, and it looked at what it could do to rezone property inside the urban growth boundary to meet some of its needs. So the mixed-use zone is the equivalent of medium-density residential, and so that's because Coburg did that, it didn't need as much land from outside the urban growth boundary. And that's one of the required processes that a city is supposed to go through. Ended up with the total of 148.8 acres of property outside the urban growth boundary that need to be brought in order to meet the residential need. And I'm including parks and streets with that residential need in my summary here. If we turn to the next page, we have Coburg's employment needs. This is the area where there was the greatest change from the 2010 study to the update in the 2014 study. And this is that change created some confusion last time when we were talking. So I want to start out talking about that change. It moved from 2 to 3 20-plus acre parcels, which is 40 to 60 acres, to a need for 91.7 acres. And the reasons that it made that change, and we'll talk in more detail about the reasoning there, basically there was a change in employment needs for Coburg itself. Some of the assumptions about how many employees were going to be working in Coburg were changed, and then it addressed the regional need. There's 2 different kinds of analysis, and I'll talk about them separately as we go through this, but they ended up with a single conclusion from the city. Talk a little bit about the criteria on the next page that's headlined needs process for EOA. EOA is Economic Opportunities Analysis. This is just a quote from the state rules about the Economic Opportunities Analysis process. They have to review national, state, regional, county, and local trends, and that's where, again, we get into this regional kind of thing. Cities and counties are strongly encouraged to analyze trends and establish employment projections in a geographic area larger than the planning area. This is the rationale for Coburg to look at regional questions, because the rules strongly encourage a city to go beyond just what the city needs to look at this regional opportunities, and Coburg did that. Supposed to identify required sites, inventory industrial and other employment lands, and assess the community economic development potential, looking at advantages and disadvantages. Look at the next page. The second page about the needs process for EOA. Another rule, 660.09.020, talks about, this is a quote from that. A couple of things I want to emphasize here is that specifically one of the things that you're supposed to look at is the short-term supply of land, not just a long-term supply. This becomes important again in terms of regional need. And you're supposed to look at, include policies committing the city or county to designate an adequate number of sites, suitable available types and locations. This is important for several reasons that we'll talk about, but what the city of Coburg did is that it analyzed what its local need was and what types of land it needed to meet its local needs, and then it analyzed a needs for the region as a whole, and looked at its advantages in terms of industrial employment property that had access to I-5. I know last time there was some discussion about who's the gatekeeper, who's going to control that regional allocation of land, and we'll talk a little bit about what the city of Coburg did, what the county can start doing if you adopt the Coburg's urban growth boundary analysis, and what it starts helping the county do, keep track of that. But it's the point at this time that I want to emphasize is that they're looking at different types and potentially different locations of the employment needs. So if we look at the next slide, next page, what's labeled Coburg EOA Update Process, Step 1 was to look at the local needs. What Coburg did is updated its population and employment information, taking into account the decline in jobs from the RV industry. During the update process, Monaco had shut down, and Marathon had cut back on its employment. So we had a significant change there. Coburg took that into account. And then it looked at how many jobs were going to be needed by the future residents of Coburg, which is the process that you're supposed to go through. What Coburg did is it used what's called the safe harbor process, which is you can spend a lot of time and energy on looking at the particular interests of a city and so forth, or you can use a share of the county's job projections. The state makes job projections for each county over the next 10, 15, 20 years. The safe harbor process that the city can use that's recognized by DLCD is that you just say, okay, what's the percentage of the population that Coburg has? Coburg would have that same job growth, so that would be the jobs needs that Coburg would have over the next 20 years. It's a standard process that cities go through. It's recognized as being valid. In this part of the process, Coburg didn't look at its advantages and disadvantages in terms of other cities, because Coburg wasn't trying to deal with any needs except the needs of its own population. So it looks at the viability of properties inside Coburg or inside the urban growth boundary potential in order to meet the need, but it's not comparing itself with other cities. We'll get to that in the regional need. It's important to recognize that in this process, Coburg is planning for its own needs, and in this process, it's not planning to be a regional employer. Coburg has long had a reputation of being a place where people go to work. Right now, the jobs to resident balance is there's 3 jobs for every resident in Coburg at the height of when Monaco was working. Coburg, in its local needs, is planning to reduce that to 1.2 employees per resident. So it's meeting its local needs. It's not trying to continue its regional employment sector. That'll come in a minute, but just for its local needs, it's not addressing that. Okay, so next slide. This is just selections from the economic opportunities analysis that was done using the 1.66% average annual growth rate for employment in Coburg. Then if you apply that, in the 2010 study, Coburg said it needed to meet 615 jobs. When you update that and you use the safe harbor process, it comes to needing to meet 1,292 jobs. One of the questions that was raised a little bit last time was the question of whether or not Coburg was double counting, and another question was whether Coburg had taken into account the changes at the RV industry. I've mentioned that a little bit already. I quoted the second bullet there to show that Coburg is planning for jobs, first to recapture the lost jobs in terms of meeting its local needs, and added nearly 1,300 jobs over the next 20 years. So that's the process that was gone through. I hope it's not too boring, but it's the basic analysis that Coburg went through, and I wanted to demonstrate to you that it was a careful and thoughtful process that closely followed the statutory requirements. So next slide. That results in this table, which is again taken from the economic opportunities analysis, and it shows that the 1,292 added jobs. Emphasize this is in commercial and industrial jobs. We'll be talking mostly about industrial jobs, and that's a separate line here, but the analysis was for all kinds of jobs, and Coburg is looking at meeting those all kinds of jobs. The one last thing on the commercial properties, if you see it, adjusted new acres needed over to the right is 28 acres. That accommodates most of the available commercial land in Coburg. There was questions about rezoning that land. Under this analysis, that land can't be rezoned because it's needed for commercial development under this analysis. Then again, in terms of industrial light and campus, The needed new acres is 61.8, and then there's a vacancy rate of 10%. Just a quick discussion about that. It's a standard process. What we're talking about is not the number of employers on the property, but the number of employees on the property. And economically, you're going to have circulation. People will come, people will leave, businesses will come, businesses will leave. So it's quite common to calculate a vacancy rate so that you can accommodate that and keep the optimal number of employees. So 10% is a standard vacancy rate that's used. So the end result is that you need a little bit more acreage because some of those acres are going to be vacant. If you look at the Monaco plant, obviously there was a big vacancy there, a lot more than 10%. It has since filled up so that now it's at least 90% full. Those buildings are all being used to provide employment, but there's some circulation there. There's some vacancies, and over time, businesses that are there may leave, and so we need to calculate that into the final numbers. Final adjusted new acres needed 68 acres. And that's for Coburg's local need. Now, we'll get to in a second showing that 68 acres is somewhat accommodated inside the city and somewhat not. But let me take on the next slide. We look at the second part of the process, the regional needs. This is after Coburg has determined that it needs some additional employment land in order to accommodate its future job growth for its residents. Coburg did what the rules I quoted to you earlier strongly encouraged the cities and counties to do, and that is look at the regional needs. The way that Coburg processed that is it started out looking at what the region had identified as possible employment needs. And looking at what Lane County Economic Development said was a need, looking at needs identified by Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County, especially in terms of the Goshen process. That identified a particular kind of characteristic of opportunity that is not being provided by the current climate of available properties and is not potentially being fully met in terms of the development plans for Goshen or Eugene or Springfield. And that is properties that are close to I-5, have easy access to the freeway, and are in large parcels. There's some of that in Springfield that Springfield is looking at doing, and Goshen is potentially that, although you've been emphasizing the rail there as much as the freeway. But after you do that analysis, it's clear that there are some opportunities for jobs that to talk about them as regional jobs is what we did here, but they're really what you might call I-5 jobs. There's employers who are looking to locate somewhere on the I-5 corridor, and they may locate in California, they may locate in Oregon, they may locate in Washington, if they can find a property that meets their needs, which is I-5 access and so forth. If the analysis showed that if the region makes some properties available, it will capture some of those jobs. If you read the economic opportunities analysis, it talked about, we're essentially competing with Salem and Portland and those kinds of areas for these jobs that are floating up and down the corridor. So that's part of what Coburg wanted to look at. It looked at what sites were available. It looked at the employment forecast growth rates for the county as a whole, and then it took into account competitive sites in Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County, what was planned for, came up with a determination that there were some properties that were still potentially available. Yeah, next slide, please. This, again, is a quote from the record, a quote from the Economic Opportunities. Talks about this second scenario, which is the regional growth. in addition to capturing the safe harbor share, that's the local need, there's this regionally forecast job growth. It's an enhanced economic opportunity consistent with the findings of the urbanization study that was done before, and emphasizing Coburg's competitive opportunity in this regard. This is often what's called a short-term economic analysis for what Coburg did. Coburg identified that there might be some other properties coming online years down the road. But there's an immediate opportunity for this. It's not in the record before you, but it was in the record before the city of Coburg in the process, and so it's in the minutes. But there are already employers who are interested in purchasing and developing the land that Coburg has not yet brought inside the urban growth boundary. The city of Coburg has been approached by developers who want to take that land to do exactly what this process led to conclude was available properties. They're willing to pay the cost of the additional infrastructure that would be needed. Water needs to be taken over to the east side, and there's some roads that need to be built. They're willing to absorb those costs. They're ready to move forward. So it's a validation of the process that the city of Coburg went through, that there are developers already knocking on the door waiting for this to happen. So if I can have the next slide. Thank you. Okay, now here's a summary of what Coburg did. Column A shows the internal local need that we talked about. If you look down there, where it says plus local industrial need forecast A, there's your 68.7 acres of industrial land that Coburg needs. Some of those lands are going to be large lots. Some of those are going to be small lots. Some of that can be accommodated inside the city of Coburg. There's 28.4 acres of land already inside the city limits. So if Coburg were to stick just with its local needs, it would need an additional 40 acres of property. But Coburg did the regional analysis. Look at the second line there where it says regional large site acreage demand. Based on the state numbers and based on Lane County's population forecast, it's estimated that there's a need for 463 acres of this I-5 access property in Lane County. Coburg has one of the early opportunities to provide some of this need. What the council decided to do was to go with assuming 10%. We can meet 10% of that local need. And that's what column B1 is. B2 and B3 talk about 20 and 30%. Coburg didn't go that far. If you look at the net Coburg regional acreage demand, that's 46.3 acres, that's 10%. You add 10% of the vacancy rate, it comes to 51 acres. Add that to the 68 acres of internal need that the city has, results in 120 acres of employment potential. 28 acres of that are already available inside the city. None of those acres inside the city meet the large lot, 20-plus acre properties analysis, but they are available for smaller employers. Results in 91.7 acres of land that the city needs to bring into the urban growth boundary in order to serve the potential employment opportunities that can be achieved. Next slide, please. So that's the need process that I went through, showing, again, a certain number of residential and public facilities needs that are necessary, and a certain number of acres, 91.7 acres, for industrial land. Under the statutes, the next process that you're supposed to do is to look at what's available. What lands outside the urban growth boundary are available. Next slide. As you were reminded at the last hearing, the first thing that you're supposed to do under 197-298 is to look at exceptions lands. This is a map of the study areas of Coburg. The areas in blue are the exceptions lands. Coburg went through the analysis first to see whether or not those properties are available and meet Coburg's needs, not just in terms of the basic need of acreage, but also some other things that we'll talk about as we go forward. One thing that's should be immediately obvious to you is it's not shown as well as it might be on this map, but Stallings Lane is broken up into a number of relatively small parcels from 1 acre to, at most, I think, 18 acres. It doesn't meet the industrial need. Okay, there are no exceptions lands on this map, no exceptions lands adjacent to the city that meet the employment needs that Coburg has identified. Large lots with freeway access. Even if Stallings Lane was a large lot, it doesn't have freeway access. Councilor Smith has already talked about the problems with Van Dyne Road, and we'll return to those in a minute. But there are no exceptions lands that meet the needs requirements for employment land. So you have to look elsewhere outside the exceptions lands. Next slide. Under ORS 298, 197, 298, you have to, if the exceptions lands don't work, the next thing you do is you go to the lowest quality farmland that's available. You notice that study area 8, which is in the lower right-hand corner of this map. This is a map of soil qualities. The darker the green, the better the soil quality. When you get to orange, that's among the poorest, and the red is the poorest of all. Study area 8 was selected because under the statutory criteria, it has the poorest soil characteristics of any of the study areas, any of the properties adjacent to the city. So that was where the industrial land was chosen to be located. It meets the requirements. It's a little bit bigger. It's 105 acres as opposed to 91. State law allows a city, if you're going to bring in a portion of a parcel, it allows the city to bring in the entire parcel. The analysis that's in the record shows that the remainder segment of this property is not useful for agriculture, so the city brought in the entire parcel. It's had some negative experiences with divided parcels that we'll refer to in a second. So anyway, industrial lands, lowest quality agricultural property, study area 8 is where the city decided to locate the industrial properties that it needed to bring in. Next slide. Looking at the availability concerns beyond just the fact that it had to be adjacent to the city of Coburg, including exceptions lands and so forth, the acreage needs to be actually available. I already talked about the industrial lots and why the exceptions areas aren't available for that. There's the city needs some medium and high density residential properties. If you go back to the slides, you can see that 2 acres of high density, some 30 acres of medium density. Those are not going to be developed in the exception areas. A property owner who owns 10 acres is not going to turn 2 acres over to high density residential. It just doesn't make sense. You need a large parcel where you can have some profit-making low density and some of the high density residential, and we'll see what the city did in that analysis. You need an even distribution of infrastructure costs. This is something that we talked about before, and I want to emphasize again. The city figured that it would cost in the range of $200,000 to $300,000 to bring water and sewer out to the Stallings Lane area. And then each property that's developed, a residential property that's developed, is going to face another $30,000 to $40,000 of infrastructure costs on the property itself. If you divide those costs up amongst 100 acres, the Thousand Friends is correct. It's a modest increase in price and something that's absorbable. But the reality of the Stallings Lane, and I'll show you a picture of it in a second, we'll talk about it, the reality of Stallings Lane is that that's not the way it's going to develop. It's already divided into a number of small parcels. The first parcel that develops out there is going to have to pay $200,000 or $300,000, depending on how far out they are, and they're going to have to spread that cost over 5 to 10 houses. Right? That's where the price of your house begins to get tremendously expensive as a practical matter. So you're not going to have an even distribution of the infrastructure costs. It's not like if you have one large property that can spread that cost out over a number of parcels. Another important factor that ties directly into this is the orderly and timely development. Coburg figured that it needed about 5 to 10 new residences a year for the next 20 years. If you concentrate on Stallings Lane, because of the infrastructure costs, you will never get the first property to develop. Even if they wanted to, and the evidence in the record is that they don't want to develop, even if they wanted to develop, the first property is never going to step up and pay that $300,000. So it's going to be decades, perhaps, before the first property develops. Coburg will never be able to meet its orderly, timely progress of residential lands if it has to depend on the first property owner along Stallings Lane to step forward and develop because of the cost they're going to have to face. There's also transportation concerns. Councilor Smith talked about the importance of Van Dyne as a choke point for emergency services, and if you take that into consideration, there's a specific provision of ORS 197-298, subsection 3, that talks about the process, and I'll come back to that when we have access to a map. Next slide, please. There's also Goal 14 factors that Coburg looked at in addition to the statutory ones. The economic, environmental, energy, and social concerns, that's the easy analysis. Compact contiguous growth and the Coburg Loop is another element that fits into the Goal 14 analysis. So next slide. Thank you. Just a second on compact and contiguous growth. That's important to Coburg. Councilor Smith mentioned it. Coburg is working hard to develop a walkable community, central city that retains its character as a small city. This map shows if Coburg were to bring in all the exception areas necessary to meet its needs, this is what Coburg would look like. Current Coburg is the yellow. The extension of the exceptions land is the red areas. That hardly meets the definition of a compact and contiguous city. It hardly meets the definition of a walkable city. Even if you weren't forcing people to walk along Coburg Road, which has no sidewalks, it's just not a practical city. Next slide. So what Coburg decided to do, it didn't ignore the exceptions lands, although there might be reasons to do that. It brought in some farmland in order to meet its particular needs, but it's growing out in the exceptions area, but it's a more compact and more contiguous growth that would otherwise have happened if they had to look just at the exception areas. Another important factor that plays into this role is the study area 6, which is the large 6 on there. That parcel is already partially inside the city and partially outside the city. I mentioned the difficulties that Coburg had in terms of dividing parcels. If when Coburg was establishing its urban growth boundary, it had decided to bring in that agricultural land, it could have done so under the law, and Coburg wouldn't need to go through this process, but it didn't. It preserved agricultural lands. Excuse me. So now it's coming back to that. That's also the location of the east-west connector. The problem with bringing in Stallings Lane is that you're going to put all those people on Coburg Road. You're going to make the choke point of Van Dyne Road even greater than it is now. Arguably, that alone says that you shouldn't bring in Stallings Lane. But under ORS 197-298 sub 3, you can bring in agricultural land in order to meet a need to serve the exceptions land. The east-west connector will run all the way from the industrial properties on the east side of Coburg there, that's the old Monaco plant. It will run through there, across that agricultural land, and then across the exceptions lands to connect up with Coburg Road. That will provide an alternate way for the people in Stallings Lane to get to Coburg. It will provide an alternate truck route to get to past Coburg. It will provide alternate routes for public safety to get to the Stallings Lane area and to get from the Coburg Fire Department, which is located in the kind of gray area between the new lands. That will allow them an alternate access. So there's reason to bring it in just for the collector purposes. Next slide, please. Okay. This is a Coburg multimodal path. Did we skip a slide? I had a projection of Stallings Lane in there, I thought. But anyway, I threw this in for to talk about the Coburg Loop. There was a question about bringing in the agricultural land to the south of the city. The agricultural land to the south of the city is being brought in so that you can have a path for the Coburg Loop path, which the city has invested a great deal of time and money on building, already built several important segments of it. But in order to make it a loop, you need to bring in that agricultural land. The portion of the property that's being brought in has not been farmed. It's got a house on it. It's got trees on it. So bringing in that agricultural land will help establish the Coburg Loop. Again, I apologize. I thought I had a slide in here that showed Stallings Lane, a close-up of the Stallings Lane property, but apparently it was a casualty of the process. So if I could have the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the problem. This is again what Coburg has decided to do, to bring in some properties from the Stallings Lane area and to bring in some agricultural property just immediately north of the city in the parcel that's already partially inside the city. It will provide the high-density residential that Coburg needs, that is unlikely to be developed in Stallings Lane no matter what. It will bring in the medium-density residential areas that are also unlikely to be developed out Stallings Lane. It brings in enough of Stallings Lane to meet Coburg's needs. Ideally, over time, these properties in Stallings Lane will develop. It's the southernmost portion. It's the part that's closest to the city. It's not exactly compact and contiguous anymore, but it's much more compact and contiguous than if you just went all the way out Stallings Lane. The important thing I wanted you to notice here is that if you look at the properties along Stallings Lane, they're all thin rural residential properties. If I'd had the slide that I apologize for not including, you would notice that the houses are all clustered along Stallings Lane itself, and the agricultural areas of these properties are all behind. It would make them very difficult to develop as subdivisions because you would have to cut through existing developed property in order to make them subdivisions. And that was a factor that the city of Coburg considered in terms of looking at what would really meet their needs, because again, Coburg is trying to provide property for adequate residential development over 20 years. I'll stop now and make myself available for any questions if you have them.
Any questions for the applicant before we move on? We may bring it back up.
Okay, that's fine. Yes.
So at this time, if there's anyone else that wants to testify in favor of the proposal, I didn't get a sign-up sheet, so I apologize. Oh, here they comes.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Dan Terrell with the Law Office of Bill Close. We're at 375 West 4th Street, Suite 204 here in Eugene. We represent Interstate Properties, the owners of the land that the city wants to bring in for employment land uses. I'm going to try to keep my presentation brief. I think, and I'd like to take a step back and take a little broader look at some of the key issues. In part, easy to do because Milo went into such detail in his presentation, but in part because I'm a lawyer. I have continuing legal education requirements. This is a reporting year for me. I found out I was a few credits short, so I spent a few hours last week online watching CLEs, and one of the CLEs I watched was Goal 9 Industrial Lands, because it's important to be familiar with that. Well, they emphasized a few points that I think are worth presenting to you, because I think it will help you put some of these processes into perspective. One of the things they emphasized was the difference between the economic opportunities analysis that's conducted for employment lands, commercial and industrial lands, and the housing needs analysis done for Goal 10 and housing. Both start from the same place. You have to do a population analysis to project what the population growth is going to be. And for the housing, you have to address the needs from that population. And it's very difficult to go beyond and say, we want to build more housing than the population we're going to have. And that's why you have a housing needs analysis. Goal 9 uses the term economic opportunities analysis because the population growth is the starting point. The goal, implementing regulations, statutes require each city to meet the needs based upon the population growth. But they also require the city to explore opportunities that are out there, opportunities based upon that growth that may not be met because of parcel configurations, because of parcel location, but also to look at a regional opportunity and to go after that if they have a basis in their record to do so in a reasonable belief that they can obtain some of that opportunity. They also discussed what is this regional opportunity. They were very clear that this is not trying to capture any jobs that already or are likely to exist in the immediate area. This is not Coburg saying we want to try to attract some big employer from Eugene and bring them into Coburg. What the whole purpose of these regulations that encourage cities, they don't require them, but they encourage cities, is to try to create conditions that will attract new employers into the state. To have employers to choose Coburg or Eugene or Goshen instead of Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, to locate here. And that's the whole purpose of it. And I think that understanding that, the difference between the two types of studies, the two types of analyses that were done, and it helps explain why there are that regional opportunities analysis and that local and economics opportunities analysis, why they aren't double counting some of the numbers. They're looking at very different employment needs and opportunities that are out there. And so basically, if you take those bigger pictures and then you take a look at what is Coburg trying to do, Coburg's trying to meet its needs of the population that's going to grow. It recognizes that it historically has attracted certain types of employers that require certain parcel sizes, and that they can't meet those needs within just the city. So they have to expand to meet their local generated need, to expand the UGB a bit. But then when they look at this regional opportunity, they take a look at, okay, historically, what seems reasonable? They've made a choice. They want to go after 10 to 15% of that regional opportunity to create the conditions to bring new employers to the area that they think they have a competitive advantage for. And so really the question before you is, I think there's several fundamental questions. Do you want to support the City of Coburg's policy choice to go after some of these regional opportunities? It appears from the staff report that the City of Eugene has said they don't want to go after any of the regional opportunities. Springfield says the same thing. Goshen, I think, certainly becomes an attractive site to attract some of that regional opportunities. And Goshen has its own set of economic advantages with its location, its proximity to the rail network. I think another question you have to ask is the city's decision to try to go after 10 to 15% reasonable? And the last question really is that policy choice to go after that amount of land justified, supported by the evidence in the record? And we believe it is. They've done the studies to do it. They've made the policy choices to go after it, and the evidence is there. So really, the question is, do you want to support the decisions the city has made? And we encourage you to do that. Are there any questions? I'm free to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's everyone I have signed up in favor of the proposal. Is there anyone else that want to testify in favor of the proposal? And we'll move to other testimony, and we'll start with Steve Lee and then Mia Nelson. So.
My name is Steve Lee. I live at 4635 Spring Boulevard, and I'm basically here today representing Coburg North and the 8 tenants or landowners that make up the old Monaco site. If possible, if I could, since Milo talked about transportation that big, if I could put two things together the same way he did, because nobody objected, I would like to talk about the UGB and the transportation in relation to the Monaco site. I have 2 copies for staff and 5 copies for you of transportation. Before I start, I would like to say on behalf of the 8 tenants and people, I thank Coburg and the City of Coburg and the County Commissioners for bringing Monaco back alive. I'm not sure Coburg would be here today if 3.5 years ago Sally and I hadn't bought Monaco and kind of turned things around and brought the income tax or the property taxes back and things, and with your help of bringing companies there. Why I'm here today is on behalf of those companies. APEL, Mike Flynn, talked to him this morning, Calgary, big concerns, Rears. I too have a long history of that site. 20 years ago, I was Monaco's rep to build Monaco, and I was there in 1995 and started. Monaco was located, and there was no housing south of Monaco. During the next 10 years, as housing was brought up directly south of Monaco, tax records show that Monaco spent about $2.5 million buying houses to try to take care of complaints of noise and smell. Since we're 100% occupied at Monaco, and the City of Coburg approved round-the-clock production of manufacturing in Coburg, Coburg and us have had to work with complaints of noise, once again, to the south of APEL and by Rears. Each time we did studies and we're way below the allotted area, but people are kind of spoiled that it was closed for 3 years, and now there's noise. About 6 months ago, Mike Flynn came to town, and him and the mayor had a public hearing and brought people over to the plant, and the mayor said that he would work with the state to see if he could get some grant money possibly for a sound wall. People complaining are over a quarter mile away. We have learned that noise travels with air, so if it's an exhaust noise and the wind's blowing softly, it's just wherever it goes up and drops. The people closest to Monaco don't have a complaint. The people 2 or 3 houses back may have a complaint. Seeing moving houses close behind Monaco even more has been very problematic. Typically, if you look just like across the street where they want to do industrial, they let farmland and vacant land be a good buffer from industrial. Typically, if you think of cities you travel to, industrial and houses are not side by side. So again, we just kind of have a concern for just even now, the problems we have since it was approved to run 24/7. We're pushing 1,000 people out there on all shifts. The parking lots are getting full, and it's what's brought Coburg the ability to say they need more land. They have a land planner on staff now. A lot of it, we hope, is because of the activity indicators we've all brought. The second part of this, what I gave you, is this is predicated on asking or having a road put through the middle of Monaco. As you can see by the transportation study and what the city asked for a typical road, it would physically then be impossible for APEL and REAR to operate because there wouldn't be anything left for their loading docks on the way the plants were laid out. APEL, at our request and city input, specifically runs the plant from south to north so that the trucks loading in the middle of the night are farthest away from the houses that were there. REAR's comes the other direction because their paint booths were located there and their painted material comes out the south end. REAR's has loading docks on the east, but that's for receiving of raw material. That because what both these people make goes in and out on wheels, they're kind of at grade, and they have looked at loading docks. APEL, for instance, has looked at loading docks, putting them on the south end, but with the noise complaints and things, we've had noise complaints against them, noise complaints against Pacific Headwear, so we've had to make sure the garbage truck doesn't come before 7 in the morning to dump their garbage, and the same over at Carry On Trailer, which is close to the water towers. We've had complaints against them because of any dumping of trash boxes or things. Even though we track our noise and record it, the spikes don't last 5 minutes and they're exempt, but as we see from Monaco, the complaints happen, and if people get together and the paper starts writing about it, you have to do something. When you look at that road through the middle of there and think that you're passing a 600-person parking lot on the right if you put that in, and all the driveways that you see in the transportation study to be eliminated, and you couldn't show how those 600 cars could get out of there. I know from the fire marshal we have a 25-foot safe zone about both plants. I think if you talk to any fire expert, their opinion of having a road between two buildings that total 500,000 square feet in excess would not be their favorite thing to try to fight something if there was something large that happened here. The other thing that I would say is you look at the lineup, it doesn't ever show, but the road's exactly where Muddy Creek leaves Monaco site and is above ground and basically runs due west for almost 100 feet. Talking to the Marines fishery people yesterday, since they are now the unit that approves wetlands, not only is Muddy Creek a wetland, because there's no fish screen down at Harrisburg, it also qualifies for something that can have fish. Since Coburg has land at the end of the street that is a wetland but doesn't have Muddy Creek irrigation, a fish thing, those two things alone, if they were deciding who could get a wetland permit, they would lose that battle. If you probably know, and some of you were engineers in the past, Goal 5, you don't have Goal 5 in the county, but the rules apply if there's fish and you have a large Muddy Creek that you'd have to have probably a 100-foot bridge to start just to get off the Monaco site. The reason I worry about these little maps now is having just built Addison Creek, 130 lots of Summer Out River Road. City of Eugene has these 30-year-old conceptual maps of where a bike trail is going to go through. It's really amazing. They scale it down even though, a 2-inch number 2 pencil is about 200 feet wide on the scale of this big drawing. They say, here's a bike path they thought would be good. It doesn't matter that it really wasn't adopted. They have plans and ideas. They had the same thing that there was a little area for maybe some Indian artifacts. Again, it could have been anywhere between Beacon and Irvington, but you go through the checking because it was an idea and a plan like this. I think Monaco and us did our things. When I was there, the city, before these administrators, wanted land to cut through the middle. They wanted things later on. And again, think of a industrial site with a public street with street trees and sidewalks and everything, and how you would secure the site or anything else. The proof of why this whole thing's here today for more industrial is because we proved Coburg was the place. But if you ignore the people that came here, or in the case of like this road that if the condemnation process was later used, actually all 8 tenants that's in a condo own that. So now you have 2 tenants that have licensings outside the United States, and talking to Ron Roberts, it's not as easy of condemnation when 2 things are out of the country. And it just seems that we've did our part. We've been good neighbors. We all get along. But I know there's been some language about mitigating that area, but when I see that little bit of houses right there south, that little teeny part, and that whole area is still complaining, even though we're only about 4 decibels louder than the I-5 noise at night, they're like, well, we were here first. Well, they weren't, and they caused, Petra and Kevin, they get their phone calls, and you have to talk to them. You can't just hang up. And again, we will deal with it, and we're hoping that the mayor will come through and the state to maybe get us a sound wall on that south end. But if we're dealing with that, and him and Mike Flynn have been talking about that, and then we're adding 4 times as much frontage across their way, Mike's like, what's going on, folks? So again, I do think we have a job need and that people would like to live in Coburg. I'm not saying where or how, but again, I think our industrial revolution in the last 3.5 years has brought all this to the forefront, and us and the 8 tenants shouldn't be thrown out now that they've been successful and brought income to the city to be able to do these studies, and that this transportation thing will show you, and you just ask yourself if that road went through there, how you would expect those 2 companies to still function. Thank you.
Thank you. Mia Nelson?
You said it was the left mic, is that right?
Yeah. Seems to be the hot one.
Need a bigger desk. Hello, I'm Mia Nelson. I represent 1,000 Friends of Oregon. Thanks for this opportunity. I'm going to start with the residential. I read through all the new material, and there's so many new reasons now why the city can't save the farmland. It seems to me the strategy is in part throwing up so many claims that it gives the impression that surely there must be something to this. I would love to go through all of those reasons with you today, but obviously it would take much more time than we have, so I'm not going to go through any of them. But I will say the fact that we can't go through them doesn't mean that there's real substance behind this proposal. The bottom line is they are all excuses not to do the right thing. They're excuses to pave over some of the best farmland in the world when we have other options. And they are excuses that shouldn't be acceptable to you. It may interest the board to know that on Friday, the Land Conservation and Development Commission adopted new administrative rules that make it crystal clear that what Coburg is trying to do is not lawful. These rules were adopted unanimously by LCDC. They are based on legislation that passed unanimously in both chambers. The legislation and rule contain pointed language about rural residential lands, and they prohibit exclusion from the UGB on all the grounds that Coburg is now claiming. They not only closed that door, they barricaded it, locked it, and threw away the key. At the last hearing, you heard Coburg ridicule me for telling them that if they would withdraw their industrial expansion, 1,000 Friends would not appeal the residential part. But that's the reason why. This is no longer a precedent-setting case. It's just a dumb idea that can't spread beyond Coburg because the legislature and LCDC have prohibited this conduct in the clearest possible terms. So there just isn't a reason for us to try to make a point about precedent by appealing this. So I wanted you to know that that was the reason. I still think that you should deny this proposal. That is truly the right thing to do. DLCD's told you that it doesn't pass muster and would easily succumb to an appeal. DLCD almost never opposes proposals, and the fact that they did so here speaks volumes. Mr. Lee's told you the road through his property isn't feasible and that the residential expansion would damage industrial operations. I don't think you need more reasons to say no. On the industrial expansion, this is also very confusing, even for me, and I review these things all the time, just due to the sheer amount of paper and the multiple shifting and contradictory rationales. Here, too, there's so much that you should sort through, but we don't have enough time to do it, so I'm going to be very brief. The county and Thousand Friends should have some common cause with this. We all want to support job growth. We have to ensure that appropriate sites are available, but that means shovel-ready sites and not fantasy capacity. We've got to have sites with good transportation and urban services and freedom from regulatory problems. What we don't need are sites that are brought into the UGB prematurely without a workable plan because they're full of wetlands or too expensive to serve. Infrastructure becomes unfeasible when it's too expensive relative to the value of the finished land, and wetlands ties into this. How much usable land will there be to pay for improvements? Almost 100% of the flat land on the proposed expansion is hydric and could be wetlands. I've shown that on the first page of the handout I gave you. The problem is no one knows how extensive these wetlands are. The city says they think there are wetlands, but we don't know where they are. What if the site is half wetland and can't be developed, and the whole idea is not feasible? According to the city, water, sewer, electricity, and storm sewer all require boring under the interstate, and a sewage pump station is necessary. Obviously, there are also potentially financially impossible interchange improvements. The city said the residential expansion there was impossible because it was too expensive. That's very important. Last year, I asked the landowner's representative to show me what the infrastructure would cost and what the land would be worth when done, and just prove to me that this property would be able to support the cost, because Coburg has been clear they're not going to pay for this. I still haven't seen that information. You may ask, why does this matter? I'll tell you, because large lot industrial is the least valuable of all the land uses and the least able to pay high infrastructure costs. And when it doesn't pencil, that's when we get the conversion requests, such as Kaiser Station or McMinnville, 90-acre industrial site now being rezoned at the property owner's request. Don't let Coburg tell you that those redesignations don't happen. They do. They happen all the time. And why? Money. It's just more lucrative to go commercial. Another thing we probably agree on is the need to have logical and factual support for public decisions. It's just premature to ask whether Coburg should add 105 acres of industrial land because the city's own documents don't actually support that conclusion. They would have to be substantially revised. And I'm just going to give you one example of what the problem is here. And then there are several, and I could get into them if you want me to. So the EOA itself, the regional EOA prepared by the landowner's representative, states that Lane County needs 463 acres of industrial sites over 20 acres in size. That's on page 6 of the packet that I handed out to you. That's total, countywide in every city, for every purpose, 463 acres of industrial sites over 20 acres. That's not just like a regional need versus local need, that's everything. I can agree that that's a reasonable number, but here's the thing. If that's really the number, Coburg doesn't need to add anything else because we already have more than that amount in Lane County now. The smaller of the two packets that I sent out to you shows this. The REOA itself documents 180 acres of such land for sale now. Springfield has 150 acres, and you've got about 200 acres in Goshen of developable space. Add those up, that's 530 acres. That's more than the total that the city's own documents say that the entirety of Lane County needs for 20 years. So if that's the right number, we're done. There's nothing more to talk about. In addition to those acres, Springfield's going to be coming in a couple months to ask you for another 250 acres, and Eugene, 495. That'll be over 1,000 acres, more than double. So you may ask, how can Eugene get away with a 495-acre expansion for large sites? And I'm telling you Coburg shouldn't be able to do anything. This is easy. Eugene doesn't agree with the REOA's claim that all of Lane County needs is 463 acres. And this is probably the single most important thing I'm going to say to you. If that's the right number, if Coburg wants to hang its hat on a claim that all of Lane County needs only 463 acres for 20 years, that's a deadly conclusion to reach if they want an expansion. There's a paragraph in the REOA that's on page 5 of the packet I gave to you, and I just put a highlight on it. I hope you'll read that. I think it's really important. It says, this is the author telling you, he can't figure out, it's not possible for him to decide how much can be captured by any jurisdiction now. And he's telling you, you need to take a look at all the jurisdictions and figure out who should get what. And basically, the pie's got to be divvied up, as has been discussed, but the pie is very small because it's only 463 acres, all of which we already have. And I don't think he knew that at the time he wrote that. The Goshen plan had not been approved. So, what to do? I think you should just reject this, the industrial part. Give everyone a chance to start fresh. Here's what Coburg needs to do. They need to make an employment forecast that includes all the jobs that Coburg is going to capture, not just some. They need to consider Coburg's position in the county. They need to take another look at that 463 acres need and figure out either that number is right and they don't need this, or it's wrong and it needs to be increased. In any case, the land need has to be tied to an employment forecast, and that has not been done here. There are a bunch of other problems with that I don't have time to talk about. The last thing I'll say I think you should ask for is just an analysis of the feasibility of, of rezoning other sites already in the UGB, redeveloping and refilling some of the underutilized sites. There's a bunch of sites that they say in their EOA are underused, and those have not been counted. If you reject this expansion, we may wind up, you're not going to take any options away from Coburg, and I think you know from past experience that Thousand Friends has supported industrial expansions onto farmland in the past when they were reasoned and supported by analysis that respects the state requirements. We supported your Goshen proposal after you made changes. We might wind up supporting an expansion in Coburg, but I just can't do it today because this proposal is not legal and it is not supported by the facts they've given to you, and you shouldn't support it either. And if you say no, you're not saying no forever, you're saying no to this with these reasons. If you do reject it, I can pledge to you that Thousand Friends would be willing to work with you, Coburg, and the landowner to come up with something that's defensible that everyone can support. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last person I have signed up to testify is Lee Hurston.
Thank you. My name is Lee Kirsten. I live at 91640 Stallings Lane. I wasn't going to talk, but after hearing some of the things, I thought it was necessary. If you look at your map there, and you see the exception area on Stallings Lane, the red line at the top cuts the street right in half. I don't understand why they would cut a dead-end street in half, but in terms of the statements that the parcels to the north of that line are not subject to development, the parcel immediately north of the line is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Smith. By the way, I've lived on this street for more than 30 years. That's a 5-acre parcel. They're in their late 60s. Their kids have moved away. I would assume they'd be very receptive to developing their property. The small property right next to that is owned by Jackie Kittleson. She's in her late 60s. That property won't be developed because it's already a single-family lot. The property just to the north of that is owned by my neighbors John and Alice Brooks. They're in their mid-70s. Their kids have moved away. They're going to be selling that property. A 5-acre parcel just to the north of that is owned by Neil Langler. That was developed through a partition of property. Mr. Langler is very familiar with the process. I know of no reason why he'd be opposed to developing his property. The 5-acre parcel to the north of that is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Rowe. They have, their youngest child is now in high school. They'll probably be around for a couple years. So that property, of all the ones north of the line there, would probably be the last to be developed. The next property is 2.5 acres, 91624. That's owned by me. I'll come back to that. The property to the north of that is my neighbors, the Worleys. That is, they are also in their mid to late 60s. Lisa just lost her job. They would be very receptive to someone buying their property. And I'm at 91640 Stallings. My wife has been on me for several years to move to a condo. If you look at the map, the parcels that the LCOG wants to bring in are the chopped up small parcels. It's the parcels north of the line that are the nice 5-acre parcels that have the immediate access to the road. They brought the wrong half of the street in. In terms of the development cost, I don't understand why there would be statements relating to the purported $250,000 development cost as excluding the north part of the street. The south part is being included. Presumably it has the same development cost. And once development is there, the incremental cost of extension to the north part of the street is minimal. I think that that's either a red herring or it's either an incorrect argument. And otherwise, I've submitted written comments, and I know everybody spent a lot of time on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to testify? So seeing no additional testimony, so we'll move to rebuttal by the applicant. Sorry. I had to uncover my... Everybody's handing me paper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If with the Commissioner's permission, I'll reserve responding to the transportation questions until we get to that particular ordinance, with the exception that I'll say that I discussed the transportation questions in this because it's a particular relevance to the question of bringing in the agricultural land under the statutory requirement under 197-298 sub 3. I will say, and we'll talk more about it when we get to the transportation system plan, but the location of the east-west connector as it runs through the Coburg North area is a hypothetical discussion, and when it happens, there'll be discussion with the property owner or property owners about where might be the best place to go. In terms of the residential growth, maybe competing or conflicting with the industrial area, the difference between the present levels of conflict in that with the residential areas immediately south of the Coburg North, any property development of the residential areas that the city proposes to bring in terms of that area immediately north of the current city limits there, they would know that there's a potential noise problem, and so they could deal with it by installing significant barriers or whatever is appropriate to deal with that. So I don't think that while those are valid concerns, I don't think that they are concerns that argue against the city's proposals. In terms of the Thousand Friends comments, I think that there's admittedly a conflict in terms of interpretation of the rules and what Coburg has done. There is a great deal of material there. The city has gone through that material and going through that material convinced the city that it was appropriate to make the decisions it has, and the city is convinced that there is significant evidence in the record to substantiate the decisions that the city made. A couple of statements that I would challenge, and first of all, I apologize if Thousand Friends thought that my remarks at the last hearing were at all derogatory or insulting to them. I was simply commenting on the fact that their position had changed about opposition to some of the decisions that the city was making. But several of the things, with all due respect to Thousand Friends, several of the things they said are incorrect. DLCD has not said that the decision does not pass muster. If you recall the last hearing, the DLCD appeared before you, and the sole statements that they made was they supported the rationale, they supported the decision making, but they didn't think that there was evidence in the record to support the size. With all due respect to DLCD, I think that was because they weren't as familiar with the record as the city was when they went through it. One of the things I tried to show last time, and I think I showed this time, is that there is evidence in the record to support bringing in the entire 91 acres, the evidence in the record to support bringing in the 105 acres. Thousand Friends also talked about shovel-ready sites and how these sites are not shovel-ready. These sites are admittedly undeveloped property. No infrastructure has been run onto the property or anything like that. But if you read the economic opportunities analysis and you look at Coburg, these properties have a lot of infrastructure available. The sewer has been run over I-5 to the east side, so the sewer is immediately available. It wouldn't need any pump stations or anything additional like that, except the ordinary step systems that are put in and are already established on the east side of I-5. When the sewer line was run across the interchange, it was also prepared so you could easily run a water line across there. The city has not yet run a water line across there, but that could be done. The transportation needs, there isn't a frontage road that is part of the interchange area management plan, and that's planned for. ODOT is moving forward in its own admittedly slow way, but if there is development that can move forward more quickly. And again, as I said in my first remarks, the city has been approached by developers who are willing to take on the cost of the frontage road and the water lines across there, so the property is fully served as they develop it. Other things that Thousand Friends was concerned about, the division of the property into smaller lots. That if I can paraphrase, that this is a sham process, so we get the property inside the city and then rezone it to a number of small lots. One response is that if that's the job needs that exists, then that might be justifiable. But on a more practical level, that's not going to happen. The city has established what it needs for property. The city's bringing this in as large lot properties. It's going to remain in the county until it's proposed for development, and so the city will have to go through the process with the county. The county can be a gatekeeper on making sure that the city doesn't practice the subterfuge that the city is accused of. Also, the Thousand Friends and the residents of Coburg can make sure that the city remains honest, because the city has spent a decade establishing the particular kinds of needs that it has. If it was to throw that out and say, well, we fooled you, we said we needed 20-acre parcels, but we're really going to make it 1-acre parcels, that wouldn't go over with the extensive record that the city has created. So I think that if you have any trust in the city of Coburg, you can take it as a given that the city of Coburg is not intending to do that and will not intend to do that in the future. Finally, the analysis of what's available in Eugene and Springfield and the question of whether 460 acres is adequate. If you read the economic opportunities analysis that was done, there is a discussion of what Eugene and Springfield and Lane County and Goshen is doing. The available acres that are planned in Eugene and Springfield and Lane County is taken into account. The discussion about Springfield on page 18 of the economic opportunities analysis says that the EOA concluded, Springfield's EOA concluded, Springfield has a deficit of 450 acres for industrial land. The point is that Coburg is looking at a particular type of land, a particular need that is 463 acres, and that is needed land in large lots close to I-5. Springfield is planning on some of those large lots. Eugene is not planning on meeting any of that large lot close to I-5 because the configuration of Eugene is such that it can't really do that. So they're looking at a particular kind of need, and 463 acres is not the total need for Lane County for employment land. It's the opportunity, as Mr. Terrell said, for a new kind of employment in Lane County that is not being addressed sufficiently by the existing cities. If you accept this process going forward, you can keep track of what all the cities in Lane County do in terms of meeting that need for those 463 acres. You can make sure that cities don't double dip. Coburg is not robbing anybody else of potential jobs. Coburg is supplying land that other cities are not able to or not interested in supplying to meet a particular kind of need that, if Coburg doesn't do it, apparently will not be done in Lane County. So I think that the facts in the record support what the city's doing, and the facts don't support the quick summary that Thousand Friends gave. I'd be happy to answer questions if you have any.
Commissioner Sorensen.
I'm interested in how expansive your view is that within a particular urban growth boundary, that you can look outside of that urban growth boundary for needs that exist in a given community. And you just mentioned Lane County. What's the reason that it would be limited to a county as opposed to, a region of the state that would be larger than a county, or even the entire state? So that if there are needs that aren't being met, in your view, by the Salem, Kaiser urban growth boundary, or the Albany urban growth boundary, or the Harrisburg urban growth boundary, that if that need was going to be met by Eugene or by Coburg or by Florence, and it could be met, then that urban growth boundary expansion would be permissible. I'm just curious why you would limit it to a county, and why not have it be statewide?
But thank you, Commissioner, Mr. Chair, and Commissioner Sorensen. If you look at the economic opportunities analysis, you'll see that there's a discussion in there about Coburg's regional opportunities, and there is a comparison that Coburg is close to Lynn County, and therefore can rely on the Lynn County economic or employment pool in order to meet the employment opportunities that would be created by bringing in these large lots. the particular discussion, the focus I focused on Lane County was in part a summary, and there is a broader discussion in there. And if you look at the discussion, it's based on a share of the state's needs. And what the state has forecast, what share that Lane County is in particular expected to meet out of the state's total needs. So there is some analysis of the state as a whole, and there is analysis of the potential employment market larger than just Lane County. But the particular focus on Lane County comes because the city and the economic opportunity analysis were in fact doing what Thousand Friends said they weren't doing, is it was basing it on real job numbers. And the real job numbers that were available in the economic opportunities analysis are the state's forecasted jobs for Lane County. So that's the facts that the city had when it made its analysis.
Any other questions? All right, so I guess we need to make a decision as a board whether we need any additional information or not, and whether we want to close the public hearing at this time. And if we want to leave the record open for additional written testimony or not, that's kind of at the decision of the board. We got a, now almost 800-page record that we have of evidence before us. Any thoughts on need for the hearing to stay open, or need for additional testimony or information from the board? If there's no additional requirements for information from the board, I am going to close the public hearing. And I don't think there's any necessity for additional written testimony at the time, so I'm also going to close the public record at this time if there's no objection from the board. So I'm closing the public hearing and closing public record. So that moves us to deliberations and discussions. Someone want to jump in on this one? Commissioner Stewart.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess I'd like to start, Mr. Voorhees, if there was a couple questions that came up to mind. The first is, as Ms. Nelson said, that LCDC adopted some new, I guess, rules towards UGBs. In your opinion, are you aware of those? I guess, first of all, I should ask, are you aware of those, and how do they impact this proposed?
I'm aware of the rules. I've not reviewed them closely to see their applicability. I would guess this application is judged under the rules in place when the application was submitted. So unless it has some reach back provisions in it that make it immediately applicable to any pending application, I would doubt that it would have a direct application to this.
Okay. All right. And in the last time we had the meeting, of course, we've had a lot more information that's been provided, and I was able to get a phone message from Ms. McKinney there yesterday on conversations you've had with different parties in that. It's been represented to me that you believe that Coburg's process and the findings and what they're proposing is defensible, I guess, and at some level. I mean,
I always speak hesitantly on defensible percentages, but there's a lot of information, and what you have in front of you in terms of competing concerns really does boil down to interpretation of the rule and what it says and how it's applicable to this particular situation. I think the city has done additional work since your last hearing to try to connect dots and show how what is in the record and what they're doing is consistent with the applicable statute and goals and administrative rules that implement those rules. And I can't say that it's not going to be defensible, because that's always a challenge for us and for the board to predict outcomes on a review. And they're very hard to predict, but there's an extensive record. And depending on how the issues are raised and argued in front of the Land Use Board of Appeals or any reviewing body, it may very well survive. But there's a 50-50 chance on any appeal. That you either you make it or you don't.
I get that. But
And I don't think there's any fatal legal flaw. The issue becomes, to some extent, how well articulated in the economic opportunity analysis study for the industrial lands and the residential buildable lands analysis for the residential lands, how well they're articulated, how clearly the findings in this justification is made, and then whether the actual pieces of evidence that support that are in. I've seen a lot of that evidence. I've read the analysis in both the 2010 urbanization study and the 2014 addendum. I've looked at the regional economic analysis that was done by the Hovey folks. And I might have written things a little differently, but I can't say that there's not sufficient justification in those studies and the findings that are in front of you to adopt. Whether there was sufficient basis for the city of Coburg to adopt the changes is not the standard of review. The standard of review will be what was in the record in front of the Board of County Commissioners, because the Coburg adoption it covered both the area inside the urban growth boundary and outside the urban growth boundary. They have no jurisdiction over the land outside the city limits. I misspoke. Inside and outside. That is all ultimately up to the board to decide and approve, and it's the record in front of the board that ultimately will determine, and the findings that the board adopts will ultimately determine whether that's a supportable decision or not.
All right. Well, I appreciate you answering a very poorly asked question. I guess you answered what I wanted you to say. I just didn't ask it appropriately. So I appreciate that. Now, I do have another question in regards to Mr. Lee's proposed a couple pieces, and I'll leave the transportation one for the transportation plan. But I do relate with his concerns about the fact that we have residential that's coming up against industrial. And I think in the 11 years that I've been here, that's been one of the biggest challenges, whether you're Baxter out there, you were operating in First, and suddenly you have residential subdivisions that get put right next to you, and the next thing you know, you got conflicts. Now, can those be addressed? I'm going to make an assumption or ask. I would assume that the city could, as that land gets applications, if this process holds and it gets approved and moved forward, and then that land has an application for development, they could pose some buffers or certain things specific to the application that might mitigate concerns as they're brought up in the process. Is that a more appropriate place to deal with those?
I think it is, and I think you heard from the city's representative that is the time when they have to look at the specifics of how the development is actually oriented and what is done. And there may be a number of strategies the city could follow up on this with to try to address some of those concerns, in addition to what they already have in their code that talk about compatibility and those kinds of things that I assume are in their code, but without reading it, I can't tell you for certain there are. But that's the kind of interface analysis that would be expected, and it's dependent on the specific proposal for development. So that's why that would be the time to look at it and make the ultimate conclusions and decisions on how to address the interface between the residential and industrial at that point.
All right. And I guess to turn it over to other comments, this one's been a challenging component for me because I've really been concerned about, how we deal with developed and committed, how we consider all the pieces in urban growth boundary expansion as we're dealing with Springfield and Eugene and hearing different versions being presented. I think for me, I really appreciate the council president being here today, Mr. Smith, and the comments that we've heard and understand the process. I think one of the key components is the number one goal in our land use process is public input, public process. I think, I'm inclined hearing from our legal counsel that it's going to be a matter of interpretation when it actually comes down to it, how the arguments are presented and how they prevail. But ultimately, this has been a process that Coburg and the citizens have been through for 5 years with an incredible amount of work. And it's the number one component of our land use law, compact growth, and the things that I think has been trying to be achieved through this process. I think it's difficult, those parcels that go up Starling Lane, I don't know when they were created. I heard some history about it, probably a good chance before our land use system was adopted that we have today. And, I understand the concerns that are dealt there, but I'm going to probably find myself erring if motions made and supported, erring and supporting the city of Coburg and the citizens in their process. So that's the number one goal, and I believe their intentions of compact growth and walkable city, the things that they really want to see their city grow. I am challenged as I find sometimes our land use system sometimes doesn't support the desires of the citizens, so it'll be interesting to see how this process goes.
Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a question for either Lindsay or Steve, Mr. Voorhees, excuse me. And we don't want to get the two Steves confused here. So in the process, if the Lane County Board of Commissioners co-adopts, what's next?
We send notice to DLCD, and there's an opportunity for appeal within 21 days. That appeal would be made to LUBA because of the size and scale of Coburg. And if it's not appealed, then it would be approved.
Yeah. And I knew that, but I thought it was important to at least, make sure folks understood what the process here. Locally, I've been on both ends. So I was able to serve a municipal government for 12 years, and now here at the Lane County Board of Commissioners. Locally, we're kind of the final judge, in a sense, before it goes up to the to DLCD. One of the things, though, this is where I think it got somewhat confusing, and through some of the comments from both Milo, but I think where Mia was going, originally when the Springfield 2030 plan began, the idea, if I remember correctly, was potentially expanding for about 650 acres, 640 acres for commercial industrial lands. I believe that number is really beginning to dwindle, and that's my understanding. Staff's now looking at maybe a third of that. And so the other is when Envision Eugene comes, I think that they've been fairly consistent on what their thoughts were. I think it's down a little bit compared to what they were originally speaking of. But I think from the regional perspective, Coburg's in a really good position. Transportation-wise, the right off I-5 corridor, there's a lot of pluses there. My feeling is, and this was the approach I used to take as mayor, and I, people may complain about it or not, but I probably was more aggressive in my approach as mayor looking at making sure we had commercial industrial lands available. That's just where I came from, and for the most part, it worked out. But we have to look at this from the regional perspective, and it's not just about, what's going on in Portland or what's going on in maybe in the south of us. We're a traded sector economy, and the economy has become so global. And so I think that's the piece that we have to keep in mind. How much land do we have available? Sure, the economy changes. You're seeing the new digital high-tech where maybe sites aren't as large as they once were. But I still believe that from a regional perspective, you should have some number of 50 to even 100-acre lot sites available. I'm not suggesting that's where Coburg is, but that's the piece I think that'll eventually be coming to us when Eugene and Springfield come here, is talking about that. But at the same time, we need to have sites available to be competitive. Otherwise, this area is going to be, in a sense, strangled. I think there's continues to be a cause for redevelopment. I think that's a great idea, but I still believe you need to have some good, solid sites available to, in a sense, market our region. And so that's where I think, and I'm going to look at Mr. Voorhees on that. This is probably the confusing piece. Is I heard 463, but I think it was 483 acres. One of those two. And I think that was the term that, or the amount that Ms. Nelson brought forward. 463, yeah, 463. And so the question I have is, she's correct. I mean, from a regional perspective, what is out there and what's available. But if you start adding up where Eugene and Springfield are coming from, I don't know that overall number. That's the thing, and I don't know what that overall number is. Do we have that from? Because that's the part that unfortunately almost becomes confusing during this whole process. Is what is the number of acreage for the region? And I think that's important. They have that available if you were to go to the, I'm not suggesting we ever go to Metro, that's for sure. I would just nowhere want to go down that disaster. But you have an idea what's available in Hillsborough, what's available in Forest Grove, what's available in Lake Oswego. You have those numbers. And unfortunately, I don't think that we have something to look at and say what's available here. And that's so I'm having a challenge with that piece. I do appreciate the work that Coburg put into this, though. I think that we asked them to do some things. I thought that they brought back information, and I think overall, I think that a case could be made. But I think, Steve, you said it correctly. I mean, when you do forecasting, it's a guess. That's what it is. It's a guess, and you're based on your best guess. That's a forecast. You know what they call, you said 50-50. You know what they call an NBA player shoots 50%? Really rich. And what do they call land use at 50-50? Likely to be appealed. So, I mean, that's kind of where we are. And, but I think that I may, yeah, I haven't made a decision yet. I'm trying, what I'm trying to do is kind of gather that information. I think it would be helpful if we knew what that number was from a regional, global perspective here locally of how much commercial industrial lands could be available. But because of the dwindling number that's coming out of Springfield, I think the smaller number coming out of Eugene, I think that you could potentially make that case from where Coburg's coming from, that there's having that commercial industrial land available. And then I will also discuss the transportation piece that Mr. Lee brought up in the next, when we talk transportation next, because I think he makes some pretty interesting points there. So, so just kind of wondering here, but at the same time, we're trying to make a decision here on whether to move this up to DLCD or not. So appreciate it. Thoughts?
I'll give you a short short answer to your question, talking about Metro, they're charged with regional planning responsibilities, so they're the one that took that on. It's something that certainly Lane County could try to take on if they're looking at the Lane County region to try to allocate for that area. The challenge, however, under Goal 9 is that it calls out and asks for an economic opportunity analysis that is not county-centric necessarily. And it's not only based on what a particular city determines to be what they think is the employment need of that city. It's not just that, it's that Coburg is pointing to in this situation. And each city within Lane County has that opportunity. So in a sense, on a case-by-case basis, you may want to keep track of some of that stuff. But ultimately, if you wanted to know what the answer is and how it should be allocated, you could embark on a long-range planning program that might be kind of gnarly and interesting at the same time to try to determine what that is, but I don't think that necessarily precludes a city from bringing in analysis beyond that area, the planning area. So for Coburg, the planning area is Coburg, but then they've looked at larger Lane County using the economic analysis that Hovey did, which looked at the state and it looked at both Region 5, which is Lane County, and the state predictions to come up with the nebulous need of acres kind of thing, which is really the opportunities that are needed, not necessarily connected directly to jobs counts in one place because of population in that area. And so that's something that the county might take on, but ultimately you have to determine in this case whether what the city of Coburg has done in their analysis and adopted and proposed for co-adoption by the board is a reasonable projection or speculation or whatever you want to call it about what's going to happen in the future and what kinds of things does Coburg need in order to provide it the opportunities to, on the economic opportunity side, have those available when and if somebody needs that.
And that's a good point. I appreciate that. Coburg seems to want to be in this position, and I respect them for that. Again, when I served as mayor, I wanted Springfield to be the economic engine of Lane County. That was my goal. And whether we achieve that or not, I think we were going down that road. But so this is where Coburg wants to be, and I respect that. And so I think you made a good point. I think going down this, I'd never want to see us go down the rat hole of Metro. And I would have a funny feeling the cities would ask us to punt to become, in a sense, that version of Metro. So that's what I have. Thank you.
So I'm going to insert myself in the queue here for a minute. I'm glad you brought that up about this decision. I just want to remind the commissioners, we did close the record. Our decision has to be on what is in the record now. So considerations of regional numbers and whether we need more information or not, the time to ask for more information was before we closed the record. So we have the record. This is what we have to base our decision on now. It's interesting. I think basically what we're being asked, if I could put this all down into the condensed version of it, is there are things that the city of Coburg is proposing that aren't exactly following the absolute letter of the way some of the processes in ORS are written out. But we're being asked as a board whether some of their goals as policy decisions outweigh some of those initial, if they're good enough findings behind those policy decisions to outweigh some of the statewide planning, as it's laid out in ORS, whether it's, 197, 298, and exception lands, or whether it's, economic opportunity, It's about, do we agree with them, and as a board, do we agree with that policy, and have they given us enough findings to support that policy? And, I appreciate Mr. Terrell's summary of Goal 9, because I think that in itself, and looking at, and even in some cases, Ms. Nelson somewhat supports my thinking on this with her pointing out how bad the soils are on that site. You're looking at a site that's very poor ag soils. They've got a desire to go after this opportunity. Whether it's 463 acres or 4,000 acres, they've identified that there's an opportunity for large sites of industrial land along the I-5 corridor. And they have an economic, and they went back and did the right thing and adopted that study as the city when they did the additional findings in between the two meetings. So it's now officially city policy. They've adopted that economic opportunity analysis, and they're justifying in their policies to have that parcel come into the city for that opportunity. So it's a policy decision by the board to include that area or not. And not so much that you don't have to have a absolute perfectly clean, this is how many jobs we need, this is how many acres per job, it adds up to this many acres, and this is what we're going to bring in. Goal 9 is not written quite that way. That's the way residential is written, which leads me to the other half is we have to give up ORS 197-298 for a discussion about compact walkable communities. That's the policy goal that's supposed to drive and have enough findings behind it. I'm having more difficulty on that end than I am on the industrial end right now, although I started out the other way around. But now that they've adopted the study, they've presented a clear reason why that's acceptable. Right now, as I'm thinking about whether I want to support, what parts I want to support and all that, I can justify in my mind supporting the industrial easier than I can taking Class 2 soils that are EFU, making them residential, while making all these arguments about why Stallings Lane is not part of a walkable community when it's only about another quarter mile of walking compared to what you've got, where you got the line now. And that little piece of HDR you got there is actually smaller than most of those parcels. And my experience as a civil engineer, 29 years in the development community, I can think of, there was some discussion about how small lots of HDR and medium density residential don't pan out. Roy Gray made a living doing 1 acre medium density residential and all that in Springfield. I mean, so some of that kind of hand waving argument about why North Stallings isn't in it is still bothering me, and I have to think hard about that. I look at Santa Clara, Irvington Road, bowling alley parcel after bowling alley parcel line north-south there along Irvington Road, and it has developed since I've moved here. In '93. It's, 2015, 22 years. Almost that entire length of Irvington Road is now subdivision. In fact, he's left already. Steve Lee developed a subdivision in Santa Clara on one of those odd-shaped parcels that used to be rural residential lands. So that's almost the entirety of Santa Clara. That is most of Eugene's housing stock right now. Most of their inventory is exception lands that were brought in. So it's really difficult, looking at that and saying, when you look at a picture of just the residential, the way it was drawn, it kind of looks drawn out and all that, but Coburg's not really that big of a town. A quarter mile is not that far to walk. You have your maps that are scaled incredibly in yards instead of meters or some other weird thing. And as an old 220, 100-yard person, that's the way I think anyway. A 440 is not that far once around the track. So I'm having a little bit of difficulty with that. And I know that, we keep trying to separate the transportation element. But part of the justification of the EFU is so it make it easier to bring in the transportation element. I don't see the feasibility of where the transportation element's located right now. You know, I'm familiar with the North Coburg Industrial Park. You're not getting there from here with a road between those buildings. You're more likely to get there on the north end of the North Coburg Industrial Park and come across paralleling that parcel, which would bring the road in just south of some exception lands and boundary the exception lands. So, and then the real question is if we're going to talk transportation, that road really needs to connect further even to the east of town to Powerline Road and Coburg Road in that direction where the truck traffic comes from Harrisburg, if it's going to be a true bypass.
It does.
So, yeah, that's and I don't know whether, you know, it may be able to do that in its current location, but I don't think you're going to get to terminate it onto Industrial Way, Coburg Industrial Way. So you know, I'm a little bit torn about bringing in Class 2 EFU when there's still exception lands left, based on the only thing I've got to justify it right now is this walkable, compact community. And I know there was a lot of public input around that, so I've got to weigh the public input versus that. But it is really difficult in that we have, you know, it's pretty easy for me to make a policy decision about taking an economic opportunity versus overcoming the state's preservation of farmland, which is very strong in statute, and particularly high-value farmland. You know, I don't know, what are we, Class 6 soils over there on the industrial, and we're Class 2 over there, which is pretty good. So I'll have to think about that a little bit more, but I think what the board has to think about is, do we have enough evidence in the record and findings to make these policy decisions to overweigh what would be the normal priority of bringing lands into the UGB? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we're 2.25 hours into a 60-minute agenda item, but that underlies the importance of the particular decision that's being made right now. You know, when Hector McPherson dreamed up this whole urban growth boundary thing that we're working with right now, I don't know if he had this in mind, so close to where he lived. But, you know, I really want to, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking. I support what Commissioner Stewart had to say, and like Commissioner Stewart, I'm in favor of the City of Coburg's request at this point in time. I'd like to just take a moment to thank them for the diligence that they put into this, answering really all of the questions that I had, and some beyond. The only question that I have is the estimate of 15% of the regional need for industrial land. 10%. I think that's, you know, with this kind of property right on the I-5 corridor, when urban growth boundaries were first envisioned and when compact urban growth has been talked about, this is exactly the type of compact urban growth that I think was the general picture. You know, it is close to the major transportation corridor. It is close into a metropolitan area, and I think the regional need for jobs is going to be demonstrated as a greater attractant than is being projected. So I am in support of the request, and I think that you know, if you look at the north part of Stallings Lane, it's not very far from the track and the fire station. So it really is within a short walking distance. However, there is a green belt of separation there, so I understand the discussion that Coburg had of not using that north part of Stallings Lane. So I think the due diligence has been done. I think the questions have been answered, and I'm prepared to support the motion when the motion is made.
Is there a motion?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll pass that.
Commissioner Stewart.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance number PA 1315 in the matter of co-adopting amendments to the Coburg Comprehensive Plan, including adopting the Coburg Urbanization Study Update, expanding the urban growth boundary for industrial and residential land needs, redesignate land from rural residential and agricultural to traditional medium and high-density residential, light industrial, and mixed-use plan designations, adopting corresponding amendments to official Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan and adopting saving and severability clauses.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion to the motion? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a few points in opposition. First and foremost is that the purpose of Oregon's land use laws is to require communities in consultation with the counties they're in to put together urban growth boundaries around the city, and the purpose of those boundaries is to protect the core of the community against expanding out onto agricultural lands surrounding the area. And the reason for that is the statutory purpose of protecting forest and farmlands in our state. So this proposal, number one, it expands the urban growth boundary and includes areas of agricultural production. And in my view, it justifies that by using the need for jobs and the need for industrial land within that urban growth boundary, premised upon an economy way outside and way to the extreme of the actual urban growth boundary involved. Now, the city, in response to my question, said, well, basically, you know, there are needs in the state, and this urban growth boundary provides a portion of that need in the state, or their own data shows a percentage of the need that the county has separate from the state. And they're using really large numbers to justify the expansion of that. And in my view, that's not something envisioned by our statutory scheme. It's the needs within an urban growth area, and the areas encompassed by an urban growth boundary, not reaching across other urban growth boundaries and finding unmet needs far afield, whether it be in a large county like Lane County that is more than 100 miles wide, or whether it is looking at an adjacent area 30 or 40 miles away in another county. To me, the purpose of the statute is to make sure that the urban growth needs of that community are maintained. And so this goes far afield and allows communities, perhaps Eugene, perhaps Springfield, larger communities, maybe even Salem, to say, gee, there's unmet needs. Portland just isn't pulling its weight, or Gresham isn't pulling its weight, or Lake Oswego isn't pulling its weight. So therefore, we can borrow that excess capacity, and therefore justify expanding our urban growth boundary. To me, that's not the statutory scheme that's been set up to protect communities from this type of unbridled, unplanned, and I might add, very expensive growth.
Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Milo, are you employed by LCOG? Is that correct? Lane Council of Governments?
Yes. Well, Commissioner Lyken, I'm an employee of Lane Council of Governments. I am also employed by the city of Coburg as their city attorney.
Well, that it's a very important point. I hope folks understand land use in Oregon can be very challenging. And it's going to be a little bit different when Eugene and Springfield come forward. I had the opportunity to serve in Springfield for years, and you're going to see someone like Greg Mott, who probably understands land use as well as any staff person I've ever met in my entire life. People like Jim Donovan, they're going to have a whole host of staff folks coming before. You have a community like Coburg, Milo works basically two positions, Lane Council of Governments, and works with the city of Coburg, having to come through here and to deal with this most complicated system. And, I remember when SB 100 was passed, Governor McCall I knew that states around the country were just going to follow Oregon's lead. Oh, wait. Washington didn't, Nevada didn't, Idaho didn't, even California didn't. States, we're the only one that really has a setup like this at SB 100. It's very complicated. My family's developed properties in different states, and I will guarantee you this is probably the most interesting out of any state that we've been involved in. But I just want to say thank you very much, Milo, for your work. Staff, thank you very much. Petra, you really deserve a lot of credit on this one, and your entire staff. It's very challenging for a smaller community to go through these hoops, and like you do. So I just want to say job well done on this, and thank you very much for your service. And Councilor Smith, thank you for your great words in the very beginning. You represent your community quite well.
Any further discussion? This is an ordinance. Will you call the roll?
Commissioner Sorensen?
No.
Commissioner Stewart?
Aye.
Commissioner Lyken?
Aye.
Commissioner Farr?
Aye.
Commissioner Bozevich?
Aye.
Passes 4-1.
Thank you. So with that, we'll move on to item 12B, third reading and public hearing of ordinance PA 1314 in the matter of co-adopting the Coburg Transportation System Plan for application within the urbanizable area outside the Coburg city limits, but within the city of Coburg urban growth boundary, and adopting savings and severability clauses. And this is, it doesn't have a PA number, so this on to Lydia.
Good
Wearing your
afternoon.
old hat, sort of.
What's that?
Are you wearing your old hat?
I am wearing an old hat, so I'm here actually as the Land Division Manager today, but I'm covering for Becky Taylor, our Senior Transportation Planner. She's in the new employee orientation today, so I thought I'd had a little bit of background on this. I might be able to cover okay. So as you recall, this transportation system plan, though we began with the City of Coburg, was interested in pushing the transportation system plan through without the UGB approval. We determined, and the city agreed, that it really did make sense to link them, especially because of the road, that if the UGB expansion is not approved, then we would have this east-west connector that would be located outside of the urban growth boundary. I do want to clarify with regards to that east-west connector, Chair Bozevich, it does connect all the way over, so it does actually provide that freight route alternative. Just to be clear about that, that might have not been clear on the diagrams, but it does go all the way across there. So I think it does achieve the purpose that they intended. So I don't really have too much to say about this. Again, we really put that on the back burner to let the UGB discussion move forward. Now that the UGB discussion you have made voted for approval of that, the road now would be located in the urban growth boundary of the city of Coburg. There really weren't any other controversies that we were discussing about the TSP. I know that Milo would love to come up and talk to you more if you'd like to have more discussions. And if you have any questions for either me or Milo, we'd be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Well, I think any questions for staff before we reopen? Did we ever open the public hearing on this one? I don't think we did. Did we open it last time? I think so. Okay, so before we reopen the public hearing.
I think you did, and it was continued to the...
Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure of that. So any questions for staff before we reopen the public hearing? Seeing none, I will reopen the public hearing, and I will ask the applicant if he wants to give any testimony right now, particularly seeing some of what we heard during the previous public hearing.
Thank you, Commissioner Bozevich, Mr. Chair. I will be as brief as possible. If you have questions or concerns, I think I and Petra, the city administrator, would be happy to discuss those with you. If we can work those out before the close of the hearing, then maybe we can provide some additional insight. The only thing I would say is that the serious questions that seem to have been raised is about the viability of the east-west connector. It was in the previous transportation system plan that was approved by the city and by the county. It was at the time very, very conceptual, just that there should be a line across there somewhere. In this transportation system plan, it has become a little more substantive, but it is still a conceptual plan. It is not committing to this plan does not commit the city or the county to a particular location of the road. If as things develop, it makes sense to put it somewhere else, then the city is certainly open to that. It was appropriate in terms of the development of this property, the development of the east-west corridor, to put it at the northern end of the residential property that's going to be brought in, so that that segment can be developed as part of the residential development. That's the way that Coburg thinks is most likely to happen. As it runs through Coburg North, the former Monaco, obviously that's going to be worked out with the property owner. The city has worked very hard to accommodate Coburg North, and I think you got the sense from Mr. Lee that he's not dissatisfied at all with the welcome that the city's put out, and the city is not going to kick dirt in his face or anything like that. It will work out what's necessary. But the east-west connector is an important part of the city's transportation system plan. It's the major change. There are, you can see that there's a frontage road planned over in the industrial area on the extreme right of the property. That's consistent with the IAMP, and would be adequate, ODOT believes, and the city believes, in order to serve the development over there. So again, I think that what we've got here is a conceptual plan that's not, it's a little more specific, but it's not tremendously different than the plan that the city and the county have already adopted. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to discuss them with you, and I'll stop now.
Thanks. Any questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So with the east-west connector and what we heard in testimony, and quite frankly, when I first started reviewing the information, I really felt that one was problematic. Was there a reason? It sounds like it was chosen because it's the boundary and it's probably going to allow some transportation for the future development. Is it possible to consider to have it further north so that it doesn't interfere with that, and still be that connector that bypasses, allows traffic to bypass going right down through middle of town?
Given that Petra's far enough away so she can't kick me if I speak wrong, I think the answer, Commissioner Stewart, Mr. Chair, is yes, it's possible. The city located it where it did because, again, if it's located further north, the city doesn't have any leverage to help finance the construction. If it's located where it is, right at the edge of residential development, then the city can use that residential development as leverage to help finance the construction of that portion of the east-west connector. It's certainly possible to build it further north. Some concerns, Thousand Friends has raised concerns about an urban road outside of the urban area. I think that the law in the McMinnville case that I quoted in terms of the prior one talks about how
Just lost your battery.
We'll go for number 3.
There's another one.
Been a long day.
I didn't want to spend too much time.
And that one's dead, too.
I've heard of a 3-dog night, but I don't know, it's just a 3-microphone meeting.
I hope I've answered your question, Commissioner Stewart. If not, please ask it again now that I have a mic that works.
I think if I have, and maybe this is the same question phrased a little bit differently, and I'm going to look towards Lydia also on this one. If there is a need to, Coburg North proves an impossible location to put Punchess Road through, and in the future, do we have the ability to add this bypass road, which is regional of significance, because it's really about taking traffic from outside of Coburg and connecting it to I-5, and adding it to the county's TSP and getting an exception, to have it cross, the resource lands and all that, to make that connection, because it seems like a reasonable need for the region to have a road that connects, Power Line, Coburg Road across to Industrial Way and eventually reach down to the I-5 interchange. So that's really where all that traffic is coming down from. It's coming down from Halsey and Harrisburg, in truck traffic. There's not that much that comes down North Coburg.
Exactly, Mr. Chair. I think that, that's the incentive for doing it from Coburg's perspective. It helps with the blockage of Van Dyne and so forth. But the main thing is to get that traffic off of downtown Coburg and all the intersections. I think that under current law, you might not need an exception, but certainly the city of Coburg, if it's moved north, the city of Coburg, I think, would support that.
So, Chair Bozovich, just very quickly, yes, we could certainly add that to our transportation system plan. As you all know, we are currently updating that. That's another one of Becky Taylor's projects she's managing, and we've actually discussed that idea as we've been having these conversations with Coburg about their TSP and UGB. In brief, council here, what we would recommend is that we could keep it in the transportation system plan for Coburg at the moment, and we could continue to have that discussion. Certainly, I would put Becky and Coburg in touch with each other, because again, we're developing our project needs in our transportation system plan, so she can capture that as well, so we can also have that in our TSP. And then at the time that, the actual development occurs, the disadvantage of not having it within the city of Coburg, and perhaps that's what Petra is going to address, is we don't have any way, Lane County wouldn't be able to pay for it. We don't have any way to fund that. We don't have systems development charges the way cities do. So I think I'll turn it over to Petra, because it looks like she wants to make a few comments as well.
No, I agree with the observations about the through traffic. That was definitely the primary motivation to reduce the amount of infrastructure improvements that needed to be made on the Lane County facilities inside the city limits. And we do have a very high volume of freight traffic that goes through the city of Coburg. We agree and would be amenable to changing our plan to become consistent with the future TSP for Lane County, but I would encourage you to allow us to move forward with the plan as stated, and at which time our plan becomes inconsistent with the county plan. We then have a 12-month period to maintain consistency within the MPO boundary.
Thank you. I think that answered that question really thoroughly.
Yes, it did.
So, any further testimony from the applicant?
No, Mr. Chair, I think we've exhausted you.
Is there anyone that wants to speak on this? The sign-up sheet, the only person that was signed up was Mr. Lee, and he's left. So I don't see anyone else wants to speak on the TSP. Seeing none, then is the board amenable to closing the record and closing the hearing and closing the record at this time? No further information needed? Then I will close the hearing and close the record. And move to deliberations and a possible motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd move approval of ordinance number PA 1314 in the matter of co-adopting the Coburg Transportation System Plan for application within the urbanizable area outside the city, or outside Coburg city limits, but within the city of Cottage Grove urban growth boundary and adopted savings and severability clauses.
Second.
Any discussion to the motion? Commissioner Farr.
Just for further clarity, the east-west connector in question is conceptual in nature in its current location, and the discussion is to potentially, at some point, discuss moving it further north. But the drawback there is that it would push it potentially outside of the city limits of Coburg, and thereby it would have to go into the transportation plan, our TSP, rather than the city of Coburg, and we don't have funds to build it. Is that a good characterization? If it's outside of the city limits of Coburg.
That's right. Again, the advantage of having it within Coburg's city limits is that they have the ability to assess SDCs that we don't. As you know, we're very creative and aggressive with ways that we partner with places like the city of Coburg to look for funding opportunities, but that's what we would have to do. We don't have funds in our road fund to construct a new road like that. So again, I think Petra's recommendation was a good one, that we can keep it in the Coburg Transportation System Plan. And then, as she mentioned, if we do progress and we do determine that this becomes something we want in our Lane County TSP, then we'll work with Coburg just within that 12-month period to make the City of Coburg's plan consistent with the Lane County TSP.
Well stated. Thank you. And so by passing this motion, we don't seal anything for certain. This just allows the progress to move forward toward what ultimately is going to be a final discussion.
That's correct. I mean, this really is a very conceptual plan, the TSP. This conceptually approves the road. As you know, there's many more steps to actually constructing the road.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion to the motion? So I just want to briefly say, thanks to Coburg staff and all that, this isn't just about the east-west connector. There's a lot of other stuff in their transportation system plan. A very aggressive plan for active transportation. A lot of pathways included in it and pedestrian improvements. It's not just about getting freight traffic through Coburg safely. It's also about a very robust active transportation plan. So I wanted to make note that even though all the questions have been around the east-west connector, that's because it's the easy focus for us right now and was the controversial piece, but there's so much else in this plan besides that. I just want to recognize that. Any further discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, I will call for the roll, seeing this is an ordinance.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Stewart?
Aye.
Commissioner Lyken?
Aye.
Commissioner Farr?
Aye.
Commissioner Bozevich?
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. So thank you, everybody. And we are going to now recess and reconvene in the Board of Commissioners conference room for a work session on the Lane County strategic plan. So I will give us about 5 minutes here to everybody move upstairs. We are recessed.
So I'd like to call us back to order. Lane County Board of Commissioners regular meeting for Tuesday, December 8, 2015. And we are at item 13A, which is a work session on the Lane County 2014 through 17 annual strategic plan review with Steve Mokrahusky and Judy Williams. And Steve, if you want to get us started.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, and I know the hour is late, and we'll do our best to work through all this information and get us out of here. But we wanted to spend as we talked about this morning, spent about a year since the board adopted the current strategic plan, and we've made some really great progress, I think. 18 completed goals in the past 12 months, and just to touch on a few of them, between balancing our budget and maintaining critical services in the current fiscal year 15-16, adopting a new 10-year public safety plan, conducting and passing with flying colors the first audit of the jail levy last year or earlier this year, securing grant funding for critical jail diversion program, developing and approving a new economic development plan, and a number of significant investments that the board has made that have brought progress on new businesses and new jobs in our community, around 1,000 new jobs that have come to Lane County as a result of the board's efforts and our investments in business expansion and relocation. Development of and approval of a new equity and human rights plan that the board has supported. And we also, as I mentioned this morning, have developed department strategic plans. So all of our departments, as part of the budget this year, began to follow the similar model that the board adopted with the one-page strategic plans, and we're continuing to evolve that process and get deeper in our strategic planning down at the department level. As I said this morning, some of the keys to success, I think, for our strategic plan today have been the board's consistent support and the fact that you regularly refer to the strategic plan, you talk about it in meetings, you talk about it publicly. Our employees and our leadership team in the organization hears you articulate our priorities and goals, and they know that it's important to the board. They know that you're holding all of us accountable for the goals, the priorities and goals that you established. I think the clarity and simplicity of the priorities, as I said this morning, we have these three priorities: a safe and healthy county, vibrant communities, infrastructure, is really critical. It's easy for all of us to remember. It's very focused on the areas that are appropriate for us. And then our outstanding team in county administration, human resources, county council, public works, health and human services, information services, operations, assessment and taxation, the sheriff's office, the DA's office, and everyone else throughout Lane County have all been committed and unified to implementing the board's goals and priorities. One thing that I'm going to pass it off to Judy, and she'll go through the completed goals and then adjusted and new goals that we've added, and then we want to have a conversation with the board. This is a work session, so we're not asking for action today, but looking for feedback, and then I think we'll come back and have the board ultimately adopt the updated strategic plan. But one of the things I just want to note as a focus going forward is I think, as great of a job as we've done in establishing these really clear and simple and appropriate priorities, I'd like to see us continue to work on our mission and vision, our purpose statement. I forwarded to the board's communication and an article from the Harvard Business Review that I found really interesting and compelling around an accounting firm, international accounting firm that worked with its engaged employees in a conversation around what the purpose of that organization was. And it wasn't just an accounting firm. They really had an impact on changing the world. And I think we're at a good place in our organization now to start having that conversation. And there's so much great work that we do we change the world every day right here in our community. And we need to do a better job. Just as Mr. Reister said this morning, we need to do a better job articulating for our taxpayers what they're paying Lane County for. We know, about 10-11% of county property tax bills. So for all property tax owners in Lane County, about 10 to 11%, at least in in municipal areas within incorporated cities, 10 to 11% goes to Lane County. And we need to do a better job of articulating that in the services that people are paying for or not paying for, as well as telling the story about the value of what we do in our organization, the state and federal resources that we leverage to provide services here. And so it's creating an inspiring vision and a shared purpose in the organization is something that I would like to see us work a lot, as much as we focus on specific goals, tactical goals, strategic goals in the organization. I also want to see us look at what our overall long-term vision and shared purpose in the organization is. I still have a feeling that there's a bit of an element of a collection of independent departments providing services, and I'd really like to see our organization get more to the place where each individual employee, work group, division, department identifies with their work group and what they do, whether it's public health or mental health or roads or waste management or assessment and taxation or public safety services, that they identify with their role in the community, but they also identify with the organization and the purpose of Lane County as a whole. So that effort will take some time, but I just wanted to put that out there to the board. It's one of the things I'd like to see us focus on going forward, in addition to the significant number of goals that we're going to be working on. So I'll pass it off to Judy to go through what we've accomplished first, and then the adjusted and new goals that we're laying out.
Thank you, Steve. Judy Williams, Budget and Planning Supervisor. So I have a number of, well, not a number, but a few slides to go through that summarizes the material that you receive in your packet. And so in the material, there's an attachment A and attachment B. And attachment A, this is just a summary of these completed tasks. The attachment A really goes through every action item, clearly identifies what progress was made. We're keeping a running tally on every action item that we complete throughout the accomplishments of this strategic plan that we'll continually add to. So I'm just going to just do a quick summary on the accomplishments and then walk through attachment B, which gets to the additional goals or adjustments. Okay, so some of the accomplishments, and again, Mr. Mobrowski talked on a number of these, but just to summarize, SRS payments, we had a goal to secure and maintain public safety services, and we did this by incorporating the 2014 to 2015 payments into the 15-16 budget for one-time spending. Community corrections and justice reinvestment funding, as we discussed earlier today, this was a great news that we had a slight increase from the last biennium. This also is a completion that was due to a lot of collaboration and brings in more revenue to our public safety system as a whole. We communicated the jail levy audits. This was an action item, and that's linked in the materials. There's a link to actually view that communication of the jail levy audit. We've identified options to stabilize or reduce expenses and enhance revenues in the general fund, and that was through the proposed budget document and adopted budget, and really maintaining those critical public safety services was key, and that's an accomplishment to note. Also, as Mr. Mobrowski mentioned, the grant opportunities, we've done great work. Again, collaborations with those involved with the Public Safety Coordinating Council. 416 grant funding was secured, and that was really to work on the prison intakes. Some of the other initiatives that we've also mentioned was the 10-year public safety plan that's gone to the board back in December of last year, and I have a couple items that can continue that work. We've adopted needs assessment. That was also part of the public safety plan outline. We've secured additional funding for evidence-based practices, again, reducing those prison intakes and We've also worked on adopting an ordinance to license tobacco retail outlets. That went to the board earlier this year. And good progress on the nutrition programs that we addressed this morning. Additional revenue for local schools in the area to see local foods in their schools. One more slide of accomplishments. We've adopted and implemented an economic development plan that really complements the regional economic work with organizations, WEDCO. Negotiated a redevelopment agreement for Six and Oak, so there's an option agreement in place. Pursued zoning and redevelopment of existing land in Goshen, that was approved earlier this year. Partnered with Workforce Development on a regional innovation training program. Again, local employers were awarded and were able to provide some needed training for their employees. And we've created a formal structure that engages the community and Lane County leaders in positive opportunities to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the plan was approved in October, so it's pretty recently, to address human rights, equity, and access, and calls for a task team to create a framework for an ongoing advisory group. And finally, with infrastructure, there's a couple of items related to addressing the road fund, and we conducted public surveys on vehicle registration fee. A team worked hard to put together the survey results were reported to the board. We worked with many of the cities to coordinate information sharing with residents in regards to the vehicle registration fee, and also implemented the board direction for that as well. That was put on the ballot, but did not pass. And then I will kind of walk through attachment B, and this really just looks at each of the priorities, the objectives, what is it that we've felt has come up in board meetings that we've heard that should be a continued priority. We've discussed with departments and really looking at their department strategic plans and trying to incorporate those into the countywide strategic plan. So I will go ahead and kind of walk through some of these new and or adjusted items. So number one, you're going to see objective was to ensure safety throughout our county, and the objective was very specific to fiscal year 15-16. So really this slight change is to, instead of securing funding, maintain current public safety services and address the next fiscal year, so 16-17. Within that objective, we have a couple of items. So the first new one would be to identify options to stabilize and reduce expenses and enhance revenues in the general fund while maintaining a quality workforce. The second proposed is to continue to work with congressional delegates and BLM on resource management plans for county resources, including potential future secure rural schools payments, forest management policy work. A couple of adjustments. We have some action items, and I'm hoping that you can see exactly what we're proposing and or suggesting, so you can see where words have been crossed out. This is how it exists now and what we would be proposing. Support the efforts of local residents in the Fern Ridge area to develop a special public safety district, and engage residents in identifying values and attitudes towards elements related to public safety. And if everyone's fine, I can continue to go through the slides, and if you want to have questions at the end, you can do that, or feel free to ask questions during.
We're stunned.
Okay. Continuing. We also have in the objective that's related to reducing recidivism, we have a number of new items here. So there's a lot of great work that's already beginning in some of the departments, so we just wanted to bring those to your attention and have them be part of the strategic plan. So continue moving forward. This is working with the Justice Reinvestment dollars. So we did secure additional funding. We want to make sure that we're following the programs that we've identified, making progress in these areas so that we can impact those numbers in the future and continue to gain Justice Reinvestment dollars in the future. Adopting the Community Corrections Act plan is an item, and while the funding did come to the board recently, the plan, it came to the board earlier because we were trying to get in earlier, but the plan itself is a document that Parole and Probation is working on. That would be something that we would adopt. Continue programs such as the 416 program, jail diversion, intercept program, a lot of collaboration going on there with Parole and Probation, Health and Human Services, Sheriff's Office, and then youth services related items, continued use of juvenile crime prevention tools to assess and deliver appropriate response level from juvenile services. So using the inter-rater reliability tools. Another one, implementation of sustainability of ethics. So that's a tool that they use for both juvenile and adult probation services. Continue the collaboration between the Sheriff's Office, Parole and Probation, and Health and Human Services to address health issues in the public safety system. And established a newly funded youth shelter that we heard about earlier this morning, and assessment programs to support those high-risk youth in the system. These are a few items that are related to some of the next steps with some of the CHIP-related goals. And you recently had a work session on CHIP and next steps. And so these are really just pulled from that work session and identifying some of the next steps. So develop materials for educational activities for some of the ACE work. Framework for service and delivery, continue to collaborate on integrated care and the creation of a health home model. Work with Peace Health and Trillium's Rural Advisory Council to assess needs and strengthen access in rural communities, particularly in Cottage Grove and coastal Lane County. And there's a third objective under Safe and Healthy County, which was to ensure networks of integrated and effective services through partnerships. And there's a proposal here to possibly take this objective out. It is something that we've somewhat redundant in many of the collaborations and partnerships that are already taking place in prior objectives. So this was a possible cleanup, if you're okay with that, to take this objective out, as we're seeing these effective partnerships are really captured in many of the other objectives that we have. For vibrant communities, that priority, an objective is invest in a strong, diverse, and sustainable regional economy. And within that, dealing with our supporting existing traded sector business recruitment expansion. We have a number of new items from our economic development program. One is continued development of rural economic development programs to assist rural Lane County communities with economic development needs. Continue participation in the Pacific Northwest Manufacturing Partnership, the regional partnership, and the work being done on the cross-laminated timber. Continue partnership in the river districts meetings, so looking at the area of continued growth and development and more collaboration opportunities. Create a permanent funding structure for entrepreneurship programs for Lane County, such as RAIN and Fertilab. And Another objective was promote ways to make it easier to do business in Lane County, and there's a couple of adjustments noted here. One is really just, there was one item that had everything that you see in the box, and we're just separating it out to two. So the first half will remain quality customer service to businesses, having a 48-hour response time for the business recruitment and retention effort. And the additional item, which would be a separate item, is commercial and industrial business related permits. We're suggesting completed in a timely manner. It was very specific as 3 weeks prior to that, and we're seeing some that it's been a little bit hard to maintain, but that's the proposed suggested things. A couple more in terms of the objective for ensuring equity and access. Again, we've done a lot of great progress, staff, in bringing this recently to the board to adopt the equity and diversity plan. So a few new items are create conceptual framework related to the overarching concepts on which to build a human rights, equity, and access strategic plan. And staff to construct a detailed plan with specific goals, objectives, and actions in order to receive advice from the community on human rights, equity, and inclusion issues. Identify a task force of community stakeholders to advise on the creation of an advisory body. And in the area of continuing to enhance Lane County's equity work with employees throughout the organization, we have 3 proposed new items. Improve recruitment, selection, retention, and advancement by addressing equity and access concerns in recruitment process. Improve the county's performance evaluation system by requiring an annual review of each employee's success in the area of diversity, respect, and empathy, consistent with Lane County's core values. Require an annual equity and access training for all Lane County employees, and introduce a requirement that all Lane County staff participate in those equity and access trainings, such as the summits that already occurred. And the last priority, infrastructure. We are proposing to adjust this specific objective just as it related prior to the road maintenance funding option. So we're proposing to delete engage city partners and residents in implementing a regional funding solution, and instead wording it explore options to effectively manage limited resources to support infrastructure maintenance and develop long-range plans. And within that, we have a bullet or an action item request to develop budgets for fiscal year 16-17 that responsibly balance limited resources with ongoing infrastructure maintenance. And then under the improving existing park grounds and creating partnerships to invest in infrastructure, we added an item. The Parks Master Plan was prior, it was not on the strategic plan, so adding continue working with the Parks Advisory Committee and a stakeholder task force to adopt a new Parks Master Plan. And then finally, we have a new proposed objective, and as Mr. McBride mentioned in the introduction, kind of trying to capture what we feel is missing as we've been working with departments on their strategic plans and finding a way for some departments to align with the county strategic plan. So really addressing the administrative infrastructure pieces. So this whole item is proposed as a new objective. So attract, retain, and invest in a high-performing local workforce. And under that, there's several objective action items. So ensure greater efficiencies in training delivery by implementing a new leadership management system. Adopt a new performance management system to ensure employees receive necessary feedback to excel. celebrate the hard work of employees while also promoting opportunities for improving services through our new Langenuity program. Explore a countywide effort for succession planning, career development opportunities, and leadership programs. And monitor compensation structure to evaluate competitiveness with public comparators. We also have another proposed new strategy, ensure continuity of business operations. It's really looking at the administrative systems that we have, ensuring excellent customer service, and then enhancing internal and external communication and engagement. And then finally, also to address another kind of missing piece that has to deal with the administrative infrastructure relates to financial management. So continue to develop internal cost controls to reduce expenses, and continue to focus efforts on budget and financial management in order to provide critical services with limited resources to the residents of Lake County. And those are two new action items under ensure critical financial management of valuable resources. So with that, some of the next steps that was also mentioned was continue to look at this so we can come back to the board once we have comments from today and see what we want to add and work that into the strategic plan. Updating the one-pager if there's changes to those, continuing to work with departments on their strategic plans, and really addresses measurable outcomes. So that's kind of the goal for the next year or two, is really identifying those measurable outcomes, coming back to you with that by the next update. So that concludes the proposed suggestions, and we can now open it up to questions, or go back to the list.
Where is the issue of homelessness in the strategic plan?
So there's currently, under the objective of safe and healthy county, we have an objective to improve the health of our communities, and this really addresses the CHIP priorities. So it's within that objective, and then later specifically we have an action item that's expand the availability of targeted evidence-based behavioral health services for people who are homeless and or who are involved in the corrections system. So that's currently an action item that we're tracking, and it is part of the plan already. So
sorry. Just a follow-up on that. I think that addresses one of the ways that we're going to address homelessness and the categories of homelessness, which includes behavioral health. But I think I agree with Commissioner Sorensen that, calling it out a little bit more strongly, as we have been doing. We actually have been doing it. It's just, I think, a matter of documenting it in the strategic plan that it is a focus, and that's something that we're putting a great deal of resource, energy, and effective management into.
Mr. Chair, I just was going to suggest, I think that's a good suggestion. Maybe we could have sort of a broader goal that talks about a partnership with the Harvey Homelessness Board or city partners, Human Services Commission, to identify solutions. So that would be one that's sort of all-encompassing in a number of areas that commissioners are working on, as well as staff.
Yeah. And I don't know if it'll tie into, don't forget to tie HACSA probably into that, just in housing in general, low-income housing.
And permanent housing. Youth element of that also.
Yeah. Well, we do have, they did add a goal around that is the implementation of what we approved today, which is the setup of that shelter. Yeah. So they did have a piece of that in here,
So that input wasn't to say, do something you've not been doing, just document something you have been doing.
Yeah. I guess I want to do it and concur. That's the same thought I had. So I was looking through this, that I'd really like to call out the mental health services need. And it's not just for homeless. It's really a need that's not fully met for all spectrums, family members, people that are in stable conditions still have mental health issues, and that need is just not being met, period, in this community through all spectrums.
Between, Brian Babb and UCC, it's not just about homelessness, but about other issues too.
I think since this was written, that has percolated even higher to up on our list of priorities, particularly in light of Shanda's revelation, so to speak, that the behavioral health is at the top of the list that she identified of risk areas. I think I've heard every single person around this table talking about behavioral health issues, and as it pertains to public safety, as it pertains to efficiency of operating in government, and as it pertains to homelessness and services. I think, and a part of that is, we talked about housing first, and the issues surrounding housing first. I don't think we've had a deep enough conversation regarding housing first yet. But that wraps into that same element of behavioral health and identifying and addressing conditions surrounding behavioral health.
When we got to take the tour of the mission there last week, I think there was a really good point made that some of the help that we're giving is actually not really helping people get to a point where they're actually being helped.
This word where you're killing them.
Yeah, and he reiterated multiple times that handing somebody money at the corner, some of the, over a safe place for somebody to camp, those are not ultimately, the end correction. We need to find permanent housing.
Congregating people without casework is not doing them any favors at all. In fact, it's concentrating.
Yeah, I've often thought about it. There's been some discussion, and I got involved in kind of an email discussion with some folks at one point about how do we discourage folks giving to panhandlers and providing an alternative to that, and that, don't give to the panhandler, give to a charity instead. It'll do far much more good. But how we can carry that out and actually get people to start doing it. Everyone wants to feel sorry for the guy on the corner with, sitting in a wheelchair with his dog next to him and hand him cash. But like you're saying, it's not a good thing for him. And I don't know if it's. And there's been some discussion on and off around the community about how to deal with that and what other communities have done while staying respectful of people's, constitutional right to actually panhandle.
One of the things that we've actually suggested to the city is, and this has been done in other communities, is, take refurbished parking meters and put them up as donation spots in locations where there is typically active panhandling to give people an alternative, in other words. So there are some of those models out there we've suggested.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, it was just on this theme of the homelessness and mental health, I think the board hit on something here. We're trying to, in the strategic plan, balance enough specificity so that at the staff level we have direction about where you want us to focus time, right?
Yeah.
But not so granular that we've got a laundry list of a million things, because the board doesn't need to worry about the laundry list of tactical stuff, right? We'll have other ways to capture that. So I want to make, you've hit on two areas between homelessness and mental health where we need to clearly identify kind of the higher level, all-encompassing list of, these are focus areas. We want to make sure we're going to do a lot of things around mental health. We're going to do a lot of things around homelessness. Let's capture that, something that's all-encompassing here. So I think those are great points. I want to ask if there are any of these areas we've identified that you think go too deep from your perspective, that not that we shouldn't pursue those things, but they don't need to be on your strategic plan. So I want you to feel free not only to add things to this, but also to say, this probably goes a little too deep. Why don't you try to marry a few of these? Or just, even if you don't tell us specifically, if you have that perspective that you'd like to see us consolidate some of these into more general goals, or do you like the specificity of a long list?
I actually, what's nice in some ways about having some specific goals is being able to actually say we completed some of them. It was nice to get the update and show that, since we adopted the plan, we've completed each of our goals. One of the things, I'm all, SMART goals are great, because they have to be measurable and you have to be able to achieve them, So if you're all broad goals, then we never get to where we completed one. So it's kind of like, but they also need to be stretch goals too, so there needs to be stuff on the list where we may not intend to ever complete within this 3-year horizon, but it's somewhere we're trying to get to. So I do believe there also has to be a little bit of interspersing of some, aspirational goals that we just, they're reaching. So, but I don't mind having quite a few of them that I know that we're pretty sure we've got a plan to achieve them, and we're working towards there, and we can tell the community, we put this on our strategic plan and we got it done. We're getting something done here in Lane County. And I think the employees like seeing that too. Because that, part of it, tying their strategic plan to ours and seeing things ticked off, and then new things added as we update. They update, I think is important. Mr. Farr.
And I think tagging along with that, the strategies that we have employ tactics that people have and that we complete on a regular basis, making certain that people complete them, but we are able to accompany them on completing the tactics that are subset of the actual strategies. When the strategy itself is pretty broad and really doesn't change, but the things that we do on a daily basis that actually, I'll take A for instance. We provided property for the Nightingale camp. Pretty big tactic that we completed, and it's underneath the strategy of safe, healthy community. But and it wasn't something that we listed when we wrote the strategic plan, but it was a tactic that arose, and we completed it. We got it accomplished, and really it's the people who did it are in line for the appropriate level of compliment that it was done, catching people doing things right, and letting them know as soon as possible can that we've got them doing it right is a key way to ensure that the tactics are continue to move forward. And looking at the list, Judy, all I can say is, wow, the completed list that you just gave right at the start of that is pretty amazing how much of it has happened in the last year and a half.
I'll just add that I think that the list of new items you guys came up with is really well done. It's well thought out.
So, question I have is, so we have called out the successful audit on the public safety measure. Do we want to call out the fact that we have a performance auditor in place? And I was kind of looking at where that may come into play. I'm not exactly sure where it will come into play, but I think
maybe in our internal infrastructure.
Yeah, that's where internal infrastructure. And I think that's the piece that will, in a sense, promote efficiencies. And that's why and I think that we do have a little bit of call out on the end. I think it's the continue to focus efforts on budget and financial management, so that kind of calls out a sense on the financial audit side, but financial management in order to provide critical services with limited resources to residents of Lane County. Continue to develop internal cost controls to reduce expenses. So I think that I think it's important for folks to know, and that just to have that there, is that we are, in a sense, trying to provide innovative, creative, and Pat even called out Shanda's work on the risk assessment with behavior, how it's moving, where it was. I mean, I think we probably had an idea that it may have been there, but I think when you have your auditor actually do the risk assessment and rise to the top like that, I think that gives us more of a foundation on where to go from the goals, as far as goals are concerned. So that's why I just think maybe calling out the performance auditor and the work that's been done there would be not only beneficial for the board, but beneficial for the public.
I think that's a great idea, and I was also just going to make a note about the infrastructure piece. One of the things I really like that we've done here is we kind of started off the infrastructure priority thinking more about external infrastructure, things like roads and bridges and parks and facilities and things like that. And we realized we didn't really have an area to capture all of the investments and those kind of things. So we've done a lot to kind of bring in that internal infrastructure into that priority, and I think that's a great suggestion. So we'll add something there that talks about the specific performance audits that the auditor is going to conduct, and we'll work with Shand on some language.
I'm not sure where this fits in or even how to express how to put it in there, but I would like you to consider kicking around some ideas about what we're doing on climate change, and in particular, we're hearing, international, national, state leaders talk about requiring us to do more, and that's sort of at the global level, and then at the sort of practical level. I know we've already been doing a lot in terms of energy efficiency or efficiency in vehicles, or increasing our insulation, and I noticed that the Oregon Army National Guard is putting out some work in Clatsop County over wave energy from the Pacific Ocean, and I think other governments are getting ahead of us in terms of some of these things. And I don't know if in the past, it's been easier to talk about the energy efficiencies rather than energy production, or some of the policy issues that are maybe, big and scary and far away. But I do think that, at least as I'm understanding it, more and more legislation is coming towards us, and getting ahead of that is part of it. But even at a practical level, we are engaging in, efforts to try to figure out how to reduce our consumption, and we ought to take credit for that. So it's both a goal, but it's also something to be an accomplished goal.
Mr. Chair, I would just, we do have a goal identified under vibrant communities, reduce Lane County's environmental footprint, and then the action item is implement best management practices to maintain healthy air quality, water quality, waste management, land use, and parks. So that one is a continued goal, because it is somewhat all-encompassing.
Yeah, we did have a milestone there about reducing our carbon footprint around diesel vehicles. One of the things that, when we were talking about internal infrastructure, made me think about my whole theme of resiliency, because it's interesting, when I talk about being resilient, I talk about external stuff like roads and bridges, but I also talk about as financially resilient and having the infrastructure, whether finances as far as the county goes. But that got me to thinking that we don't have anything that ties in emergency operations and emergency planning in our strategic plan. I'm not quite sure where that fits under that, other than infrastructure as part of our, and possibly internal infrastructure, but some kind of around continuous improvement of that system. I mean, we've been doing a lot this year with emergency operations. In fact, we got a report back next week from Linda Cook about active shooter planning and all that. They did the city of Florence down there. So it's something I'd like to try and keep something in the plan around. continuing that improvement. Might want to work with, talk to Linda, or just think about what we wanted, what kind of a goal we can identify, whether it's a broader goal that's more aspirational, or if it's something more specific we'll be able to tick off in the next year.
Yeah,
I'm trying that with what other jurisdictions are doing. Bethel School District, for instance, has been doing active shooting training on a regular basis, and they're actually training with other school districts to do that.
Yeah. And I think what Linda's going to report on was an exercise they did with Sayusa School District, Sayusa High School.
Yeah, I just was trying to think if it's in the safe, healthy county piece or if it's in the internal. If it's more, is your thought more about preparing us as an organization to be able to respond, or preparing our larger community?
Both. Maybe we need it in both places. I don't know. But I was thinking, when I was thinking about that, I was thinking more about preparing our organization as an internal goal, but I think having an external goal is not a bad idea too.
So maybe we can work on that as well. Emergency preparedness, continuity of operations. We have ensure continuity of business operations under internal infrastructure there, so we can work on that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I wish a lot more businesses would do business continuity planning.
So I had two other suggested. I was going to suggest that we remove, and I just want to bring it up here because Judy and I haven't had a chance to talk about it in the boards here. Under Priority 3 Infrastructure, Objective 3.1C2, to remove that. We talked about establishing a stable funding plan to address park maintenance backlog. And my thought was just we really need to look at developing our park master plan first, and then we'll get to the funding piece for the backlog of maintenance. So I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't ultimately do that, but at least my opinion is the priority right now is getting that master plan completed, and then follow up from the master plan will be figuring out how we secure both operating funding and capital maintenance funding. The other one was to add under 3.2 in infrastructure a goal that talks about investing in employee wellness while stabilizing health insurance costs. So we're doing a lot of work, self-funded health insurance, employee clinic, exercises that incentivize wellness of our employees, and it's about getting our employees healthier and back to work quicker, and it's also about stabilizing and reducing costs. So we didn't really capture that specifically, and I think that's something the board I know is supported. I would like to see added.
I don't have any objection to either of those. So anything else we're not capturing in that? Anything else?
So I'll just quickly add, then I'll just say I heard homelessness and kind of an all-encompassing our partnership efforts around homelessness, mental health service needs beyond just serving people that are facing poverty and homelessness, but the broader mental health needs for the community. Performance auditor, so bringing forward a goal that specifically identifies the performance audits that will be conducted and reporting on those, and then emergency preparedness, continuity of operations. And I have a note on the climate change. I guess we can revisit the existing goal that we have and see if there potentially to incorporate something related to future legislation that could be adopted by the state or federal government, that we're monitoring those and reviewing the potential impacts of any state or federal legislation on Lane County and being prepared for that.
The only thing I would add to that perhaps is that some of the things that you just added, the addenda that you just put in there, we're already doing in a lot of areas. Once again, it's just a matter of capturing it. And, for instance, surrounding mental health and behavioral health, we have a very adept and robust mental health advisory committee that's staffed, that is made up of the professionals who really care about doing their work, and they just came up with a strategic plan of their own this year that really wraps into the campus strategic plan, and just making certain that there are some of these things that are already forging ahead. and they already have a great deal of momentum. But it's not a matter of reinventing. You know that, Steve. It's a matter of sharing what is already happening and making certain that people understand that we are, for instance, contributing to lessening our carbon footprint. And we did it when we remodeled this building, and very little of that was valued in the community. And Mike John has done remarkable things at our fleet to make it a more efficient operating fleet. So things that your staff have already been doing and have done.
One of the things, I said this I think when we did my annual review back in June, one of the things I think that we are the weakest at in this organization is talking about the good things that we do.
Yes.
That there is so much great work, innovative work, cutting-edge things that are happening here and services to the community that we don't do a very good job talking about. So, again, that goes to the theme of improving our internal external communications and capturing the great work that's happening and telling that story. And that's a lot of what, you're right, what we're trying to do in the strategic plan is document the work that's happening and talk about it better.
Being chastised for something, for not doing something that you've been doing for a long time, is it's a place we should never be. I just making certain that if we're doing that, people should know that we're doing it because it increases people's confidence in that we're efficiently operating the government.
So you got the direction you need to come back with?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for staying for the late hour.
So we got a couple more items we have to take care of, one of which is agenda team request, work session request, and I will make note that we were asking, I'd like to ask here in open session for support for staff to look at our ultimate needs relative to land ownership in the downtown Eugene area in the long term as it applies to the Sixth and Oak properties, and secondary to that, to provide a response to Hacks and Obi. One, requesting Brian maybe clarify his letter a little bit, it wasn't quite clear, and two, asking if they would be willing to waive their rights to the lease in exchange for us hopefully opening that sale of those parcels. So I just, now that we're out in open session, if I can get 3 head nods, because it'll take more than 15 minutes of staff time to do that.
Yes.
We got 5 head nods, so you have your direction in open session, Steve. Did you get clear direction there?
Yes.
That's 5, you can probably get anything you want.
Let me just be clear, the letter to Mr. Obi would both request additional information about his specifically what he was looking for, as well as waiving the lease rights in order to consider to conduct a competitive RFP for sale.
Yeah. As a condition for doing that, yeah. And I think that's going to open a discussion about what kind of compensation he might want for waiving his lease rights. Right there.
Yeah, no, I think that's that he should understand that by asking for that, it really does involve waiving the lease rights. And that's not.
But it was kind of a little bit unclear in the letter as to whether he was specifically asking for a change to a property purchase versus a lease. He kind of I'm sort of supportive of HACSA, but I'm going to move ahead if not. But I sort of wouldn't mind having a property purchase, but I'll still move ahead. But it's kind of like, so what are you asking us for, Brian? That's all. The letter was a little bit too around the edges.
I think understanding the clarity that HACSA and Obi were both saying the same thing, that it's difficult for them to move forward with the securing financing and support. What they look at a tenuous lease issue.
I'd like to confirm from Brian that he wants us to look into the sale of the property versus the lease. His letter wasn't quite clear that that's what he wanted us to do. And of course, there is the ability to separate the two properties relative, because one's to a nonprofit, one's to a private party. There's different rules, but I think we've given him enough direction to start getting a little bit more information to inform the board's decisions around that in the future. So we would have that letter. Any other agenda team requests or work session requests? Then we are at review of assignments.
What you just said, just about the 601, I won't repeat it, but I have clarity on that. That's the only specific assignment that I have. Other than we will come back with formal approval of the updated strategic plan in a future meeting.
Yep.
Most likely in early January.
Okay. And we'll hear from land management in January also on fees. Any other business to the board? And we are adjourned. See you guys tomorrow.